Good evening, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon. Welcome to Mormonism Live. The Dead Sea Scrolls. Mormons have had a love affair with the Dead Sea Scrolls for over 50 years now, and often they point to incredible and even miraculous parallels between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Mormon as evidence for the proof of the Book of Mormon and Mormonism writ large. What should we make of those parallels? Are they real or are they more fiction than fact? Stay tuned as we explore this question on Mormonism Live. Good evening, everybody. How are you doing, Mr. Rio?
I'm doing great, Radio Free Mormon. How are you?
I'm so excited about tonight's show. I can't even hardly stand it.
This has been a topic that I know that you dabbled in your early time in the church. I dabbled.
I did more than dabble, my friend. I waited.
You waited. Nice. You went into the deep end. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a fun topic that in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, it was one of the main things people would pull out to display evidence as the church is true. And there were people going around and doing circuit tours. And so we'll talk about some of that tonight. But I'm really excited that you picked this topic this week.
Well, thank you. For those of you who watch Mormonism After Dark and may have been expecting a guest on the show, we had talked with Professor Allison Schofield from Denver University, and we made this plan really in short order. It was just Friday, and it was sort of as a lark, and she agreed, and things didn't end up working out. Hopefully, we'll be able to have her on the show at a later date. So here's what it is about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm just so glad because I've been meaning to do a show about the Dead Sea Scrolls forever because it's a big part of my time in Mormonism. Me and the Dead Sea Scrolls go way back. So did you say, Bill, how much you had been involved in the Dead Sea Scrolls at all?
So in Kirtland, Ohio, there was one of these circuit tour presentations, and a person came and gave the spiel and talked about the similarities between what was in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the one true and living church with which the Lord was well pleased. And then I bought a book, the same, I think the cover of it is in this slideshow tonight. I think it's the same, at least one of the ones that you talked about reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a bunch of research online at the time. I was a new convert. I wasn't that far into the church, and I was going to college at Bowling Green State University, and I would go into their computer lab and look up things with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I'll save my conclusion for the end, but I did have a lot of interest in it, and I did spend a lot of hours looking into them.
Okay, great. Great. So you're familiar with a lot of the things we're going to be talking about already, even before we started putting the show together. Yeah. But I'll tell you, I want everybody to know that I have a little bit of a history with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I just want to get it out of the way here because it must have been 1979 when maybe the same guy, maybe a different guy, maybe his dad, came around and was going from stake to stake, giving his presentation on the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was an evening. I believe it was summer-ish. It was warm. It was very warm in the chapel at the Stake Center, which was packed. It was absolutely packed to hear this guy talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the spirit was so strong and the temperature so high in that room. I remember there was actually an intermission, because the first part he talked about was the story behind the Dead Sea Scrolls and their discovery and all the ins and outs about how they were able to get taken care of, bought, taken to museums, translated, the whole 9 yards, okay? And the second part, then we had an intermission where we got to go outside, thank goodness, in the cool evening air and just talk excitedly amongst each other. And looking forward so much to going back in. Can you imagine looking forward to going back into an LDS chapel? Well, we all got back in there, and we wanted to hear the second half, which was all the connections and parallels between what's in the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves and the Book of Mormon or the LDS Church. And that was fascinating too. So I think that really whetted my appetite. That was my first, I think, academic love was this idea of ancient scrolls and Mormonism and the combination and the proof that they gave that Mormonism is true. I mean, the guys back there at the Dead Sea in Qumran, they were Mormons, and you could prove it.
And I was dabbling a little bit into biblical studies at the time too, a new convert to the church, and I just wanted to know everything about Christianity and Christ himself. You know, I'm reading James Talmage's Jesus the Christ and highlighting it like crazy. But one of the cool things about the Dead Sea Scrolls for me when I was first learning about them was I was thinking, you know, here we'll have some form of scripture, we'll have some other writings, and we can compare it to what is existing, not just in the church, but in Christ, New Testament sort of framing of the early church, which we know now didn't really exist, and also Christianity at large. Would it match what Christianity either kept or brought in? And I think it makes for a really interesting conversation, especially when this was all happening. There really isn't the internet quite yet. It was just coming online. And it was such a historical find that was so fascinating. Everyone in BYU got involved in doing a lot of the research with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so my church that I had just joined, which I believed with all my heart, was at the forefront of doing the academic studies and preservation and research into the Dead Sea Scrolls, which made it all the more exciting.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit more tonight too, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Back in the 1990s and the 2000s, when BYU and ISPART, I think it was the ISPART, whatever that stands for, that arm of FARMS. And yeah, they were very much involved with the actual academics who were really doing the research. They're not over there writing their crank journals in which they're churning out their apologetics, you know, and like stabbing at the world while they're backed up into a corner. No, they're actually engaging in the advancement of knowledge about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that was a great time. I think that was one of the high points that I'm aware of for BYU.
And the other thing I'll say too is I just think it's just them being discovered the way they were. Some sheep herder just happens upon them, and there's some, you know, there's some, I don't want to say conspiracy, but there's some things that are going on with them where they get brought to like the market and end up getting sold, and then they sold again, and you know, everybody wants to get their hands on them and know what's in them, and it just was such a cool moment when it happened. I think it happened in the 1940s, I'm not mistaken, but it really isn't until I think the 1990s, at least it felt like to me, that it had really just come to the forefront of consciousness of not just Latter-day Saints, but people interested in biblical stuff generally.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually going on earlier. There was found in 47, and there were a lot of things that had to go on in order for these scrolls to get found. A lot of them got burned, okay, right at the outset, because these the Bedouin boys, there were two of them, lost a goat. You know the story, and they're throwing the rocks into the cave up in the hills and hearing something break and going, that doesn't sound like a goat. And then finally going up there the next morning and finding not gold and not gems, but just some scrolls. Well, maybe there were something, but they knew that they were good to use as fuel for fire. So they burned several of these scrolls before, you know, I think the first one they sold for like $5, which was worth more, obviously, back in 1947, but still $5. And then it gets traded hands by people who can recognize more what it is. And then the price goes up considerably in short order to like around $15,000. But that story, I just want you to understand this. I was so emotionally invested in this story and in the premise of this story that I was actually emotionally distraught while this individual was telling the story. We're in the Pack Stake Center. It's the chapel. It's in summer of 1979, and I am emotionally distraught because these sheep herders who don't know what they're doing or how valuable this is, they are burning basically copies of the Book of Mormon all over the place. They're burning all the evidence that the church is true. And I was so distraught because what incredible things were burnt on those parchments.
We Mormons have to deal with a Bible that's been altered and corrupted by the corrupt priest. We've had so many books of the Bible that are just missing. we really are set up when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls. We really are set up to get a lot of anxiety when the scriptures are either somebody's altering, burning, losing, finding, adapting. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got so emotionally distraught I knocked my drink over.
Yeah. Hopefully it didn't all spill out.
No, it didn't, because it's this one, the one you got me, remember?
Yeah. No.
No. To quote Hamlet, no. So you can learn Shakespeare too.
There you go.
Okay, so that's what happens. And then later on, basically about 20 years ago, there was a big hiatus there. And I was looking at all sorts of other things. But in the 2000s, basically 2004 to 2010, around there, I am immersing myself in the apocryphal literature and the pseudepigraphical literature, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Nag Hammadi library. And I am trying my best to find connections to Mormonism, to prove Mormonism true by parallels. So I'm totally aware of what's going on, at least as much as most people were at the time. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about this, because my position has changed a bit on the value of the parallels. In fact, I also have to tell you this. I never really used the Dead Sea Scrolls much in apologetics, because I didn't think they really showed that much of a connection to the LDS Church or the Book of Mormon. I think that the best I gave it was this, is that they both have the same historical backdrop, okay, which is a group of Jewish people who consider themselves righteous, separate themselves from Jerusalem because the priests in Jerusalem are wicked, and the separatists take their group and go out into the wilderness and establish a church there.
Can I just say too that alone was used as an evidence? Look at how similar this, when in reality, there were probably over the course of a lot of years, a lot of Jewish sects that separated themselves from the main group and did their own thing in various places.
Yeah, the Rechabites is a relatively famous group that did that in the time of Jeremiah. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Let me see if I can find the slideshow. Do I? Oh, you got it. Thank you so much. So here's Mormonism and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that might not be the right one. I wonder if it's the other one that I can move.
It's going to be the other one. Yep. So let's just get that.
Right.
No, you're good.
It was on slide 35. That's why I had to move it to slide 1. Okay, so Mormonism and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And about 5 years ago, I saw this at waiting in line at, I don't know if it's Fred Meyer or whatever, one of these History Channel things, magazines. This was about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I thought, I may as well refresh my recollection, brush up on my Qumran. So I got it and read through it, and it covered the bases. And it was a nice thing. By the way, it's right here. I thought it was pretty good and pretty understandable, even for someone who doesn't know much about it. Here's the Dead Sea Scrolls translated. This is what I got about 20 years ago. This was highly recommended by Florentino Garcia Martinez, is the scholar who did this translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, here is the history, I think, of Mormonism's love affair with the Dead Sea Scrolls. From the 1960s to the 1980s, by the way, tonight's show is going to be divided up into these 3 parts. The 1960s to the 1980s, exaggerated claims were made about these connections between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Mormonism. These exaggerated claims were made primarily by Mormon Dead Sea Scroll, that's what DSS stands for, amateurs. In the 1990s, in the 2000s, Mormon scholars at FARMS, at BYU, get involved with the Dead Sea Scrolls. They work on translating and preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like you said, Bill, they're making things happen. They're working with the top scholars in this field. And what they're doing is they're using some kind of spectroscopy, I think, where they can actually be able to read things that were written on the scrolls that you couldn't see with the naked eye. So that's amazing too. And also preservation. And then they also created a DVD or CD-ROM, I think it was, that had images of all the Dead Sea Scrolls, really, really good images, so that anybody who wanted to look at them and do their own research about them didn't have to go to where the Dead Sea Scrolls were, they could have the Dead Sea Scrolls essentially on their computer and look at them. Also, BYU was involved in there was an exhibition of Dead Sea Scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibition at BYU, and it also traveled around the country, and I think BYU sponsored that as well. Did you ever go to one of those, or was it Rebecca I was talking to who said that she had been to one of those?
I had not been to any of that.
Okay, it's probably Rebecca. But yeah, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This is one of BYU's finest hours. So that's in the 1990s and the 2000s. But as the FARMS and BYU scholars are actually involved in this, I'll say it, legitimate scholarship, okay, or working with secular scholars, okay, non-BYU scholars. As they're doing that, their opinions about the connections between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Mormonism back way off. And in fact, they become critical of those who went before them for being too enthusiastic and making claims that were not backed up by the evidence. And we'll talk about some of that evidence here tonight and some of those criticisms. And now we're into the 2020s. And guess what's back, folks? What's back is the exaggerated Dead Sea Scroll claims resurfacing from Mormon amateurs. And we've got some clips of that as well. So what used to be is back, even though in between Mormon scholars who actually knew about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the professors at BYU criticized the earlier people, and that criticism we'll see is equally as applicable to the exaggerated claims by the amateurs that came after them as well.
We come full circle, huh?
Yes, the ways of the Lord are one eternal round. Okay, here we go. Mormonism's love affair with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Remember, this was step one, 1960s to 1980s, exaggerated claims made primarily by Mormon Dead Sea Scroll amateurs. And I have to start with Hugh Nibley. Now, is he an amateur? He's really, really smart, and he knows stuff, but he made a lot of claims that were exaggerated, and we'll get to that here in a second. But I have to bring up Hugh Nibley. He was the first to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and their connection with Mormonism. He talked about it in a couple of different books, at least. One was An Approach to the Book of Mormon by Hugh Nibley, and another was Since Qumran. And down there on Since Qumran, that was, I think, the original cover. If you look at the bottom, you can see that there's a scroll to the right, and to the left of the scroll, it looks like a jar, like from the Dead Sea, like from Qumran. Dead Sea Scroll, that's where the Qumran community was. So it's used sometimes the same. But this book was, as I recall, largely devoted to that pursuit of talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran and similarities between what's on them and what's in the Book of Mormon. And that's why it's called Since Qumran, because since Qumran, this happened. And there's Hugh Nibley. Now, this is an article that we're going to touch upon a little bit this evening. And here, even a smaller piece, okay? But it is from 2010. It's from BYU. Studies in the Bible and Antiquity is the name of the journal. It is an article written by Dana M. Pike, who is a professor at BYU. This is in 2010, remember. This is in that intermediate period where the church is very involved legitimately in legitimate Dead Sea Scrolls research and study. And the BYU professors who are involved get very conservative about their opinion on the connections between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Mormon. Dana M. Pike is one of those. And we're going to quote from 3 of them tonight to show it's not just a one-off. Now, here's what he says here. This is just this one paragraph, which I'm going to ask Bill to read, because Dana Pike, Professor Pike, does not spare the rod when it comes to earlier amateurs who made these exaggerated claims, except for Hugh Nibley. And Hugh Nibley's going to get his own paragraph here, which is going to be a much gentler dressing down than the others receive.
All right. Keeping up to date. In spite of the important efforts of Hugh Nibley to publicize the Dead Sea Scrolls among Latter-day Saints, if Latter-day Saints want to be accurate accurately and more fully informed, it is essential to move beyond just or primarily utilizing Nibley's publications as a resource. Dr. Nibley's writings on the Dead Sea Scrolls were mainly produced in the 1950s and 60s, decades before much of the scroll material was published and accessible. Although Nibley brought a restoration perspective to his studies and was correct about some things regarding the scrolls, the limitations of working with incomplete data hindered his efforts and those of every other scholar of that period.
He couldn't help it.
Yeah, at fully and accurately grasping the content and contribution of the scrolls. As is inevitable in scholarship, aspects of Nibley's publications on the Dead Sea Scrolls are dated, as are other authors, books, and articles produced on the scrolls prior to 1995.
Okay, so even though he's being very nice in what he's saying about Hugh Nibley, we can understand that his position is that, yeah, Hugh Nibley's kind of in the dustbin as far as what he wrote about the Dead Sea Scrolls. He doesn't say exactly what it is, and I think that's because he's being nice, but he is distancing the BYU from Hugh Nibley now on the subject of Dead Sea Scrolls and Mormonism. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I had a thought, it just escaped me. I don't remember, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, here's another person, by the way. Oh. Well, it doesn't make that much difference, but I did want to let you know this book, Since Qumran. This is one of the first books I read about Mormonism after I got baptized. We had a neighbor, actually 2 houses down, and they ended up moving in. They're Mormon, and they got all these books, and this is one of them, and I'm reading it, and I don't know what the heck it's talking about, or Dead Sea what, or Qumran which, because I know nothing about this, but it's just fascinating and exciting to me. And I'm thinking, I am eating this up and I want to learn more. Okay. And so I get on my mission now. How many people out there have heard of Dr. Einar Erickson? Einar Erickson. I met him on the mission, not personally, but some other missionary had a couple of cassette tapes of talks of his. This guy was, he was a phenomenon. He would go through all of these ancient texts, not just the Dead Sea Scrolls. It would also be the Nag Hammadi and from Egypt, which are Gnostic texts. By the way, these are Gnostic texts and Dead Sea Scrolls are Jewish texts. So you've got Gnostic and Jewish. And I was going to say one other thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which hopefully will help as we go forward, which is so many scrolls were found. And basically you can divide them into 2 groups. One group of scrolls are copies of books that are in the what we would call the Old Testament, or what we would normally call today the Hebrew Bible or Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. So they have copies, and a lot of times multiple copies. And in the case of Isaiah, a really good copy of all the books in the Old Testament with one exception, and that's Esther. So they have lots of those, but those would be books that are Dead Sea Scrolls that are earlier versions, much earlier versions of the Old Testament that we were using before they were discovered 1,000 years earlier, actually. And the second group would be a bunch of documents that appear to have been considered authoritative scripture that are not in the Old Testament, and that basically I don't think anybody really even ever heard of before, like the Damascus document or the Temple Scroll, Copper Scroll, lots of different things like this, the rule of the community. So he would talk about anything and everything and try and link them up to Mormons, okay, and Mormonism. And he just had this delivery, and he talked like a machine gun with a Utah accent. He was amazing. So I listened to several of those tapes, and I was convinced. And I think, you know, the thing is this, he has this momentum, the way he delivers his material, and everything he says, every connection he makes, he seems to be so bowled over by how amazing this connection is that I sort of went along with him, and I felt bowled over myself. I mean, if he's getting bowled over by it, obviously it's worth getting bowled over about. Have you ever heard of Einar Erickson, Bill?
No, and I will say, I will jump in here and just say this though. On this slide here, I remember what I was going to say, which is the criticism he's giving is, I can't remember what the line here was, but although Nibley brought a restoration perspective to his studies and was correct about some things regarding the scrolls, the limitations of working with incomplete data hindered his efforts and those of every other scholar of that period at fully accurately grasping the content and contribution of the scrolls. When you work backwards, when you start with these scrolls probably prove the church true, and I'm going to go look through these scrolls and try to find evidence of Mormonism, you really are missing the beauty of what these actually are, what they actually can say, what it does demonstrate in terms of a small religious group and how they survived and how they created order and broke off of. You really miss the boat when you do the trick that all apologists do, and we did it at one time too, which is look at every ancient document solely for the evidence that Mormonism is true.
Yeah, that's a great.
No, I'd never heard of Einar Erickson.
Yeah, well, he's got a web page, and a lot of these links don't work anymore. I was trying to find some kind of audio, at least, to where you could hear a snippet of how he sounded, but I couldn't find anything. So my apologies. And he passed away a while back. So rest in peace, Dr. Erickson. Now, here's another individual who did a lot of writing on this subject, Eugene Sage. It's Seach or Sage, Seaich. And when I was on my mission, this book, I would call it unpublished manuscript. Now, on the right, that's an unpublished manuscript that was circulated around in the mission over in Japan, for crying out loud. And it was somewhere early on, I got a hold of this. It wasn't that long, and I read it, and I couldn't understand a dang thing in it, but I knew it proved Mormonism true, so I loved it. And I think the one on the left is after he scraped some money together or whatever it was that he needed to do, he had it published in a bit more of a nicer format. And that's the one on the left. But I wanted to include the one that was green because I saw it when I was looking for it. I said, that's the one. That's the one that I had or that I saw on my mission. All right. And you can see he's also going to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi texts. So once again, these are very, very different libraries. Actually, Nag Hammadi ends up being found in 1945 and Dead Sea Scrolls in 47. So 2 years apart. 2 years apart, two of the most significant libraries, ancient libraries discovered. It was amazing. However, when you have two completely different kinds of writings and you're looking for connections between those and Mormonism or the Book of Mormon, well, now you've doubled your possibilities at least. Okay. Now, from there, we have to go to number 2. The second phase of Mormonism's love affair with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the 1990s and 2000s, when Mormon scholars at FARMS get involved with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we've talked about this before. I've copied and pasted it in order to make it a sort of a title page for each segment of tonight's show. And that's when they start publishing books that look like this. There's Illuminating the Dead Sea Scrolls, Mysteries of Qumran Revealed by Donald W. Perry, BYU professor. And over here, we got LDS Perspectives on the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was edited by Donald Perry, and Dana M. Pike, both BYU professors. I had the one on the right. The one on the left I did not have. But the one on the right ends up being a bunch of essays that were collected, written by different scholars and collected under this volume. And I remember at the time, Bill, I remember reading this and wanting to go back to the glory days of Einar Erickson and Hugh Nibley and being kind of confused that they weren't making a lot of connections between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Mormon. In fact, they seemed sort of aloof from that. They were distancing themselves from that practice. And I remember feeling a little bit disappointed by that. But the fact that I remember that is interesting because I've been doing some research over the last few days on this show, preparing for this show, and I found a bunch of quotes that show, yes, it was absolutely going on then with the BYU professors.
And I had the same experience. Again, I think it's this book on the right that I had as well. And I remember even in the fireside where they did the presentation, I came thinking there was just going to be so much. And there were like 3 things, and then otherwise it was just a history lesson on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the beef? Well, there wasn't any beef to begin with, and they're trying to make amends. They're trying. I mean, it's like they're rubbing shoulders with the secular scholars, the top-notch guys and gals, men and women on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they want to act accordingly, I think.
I had this one too. This was another one that I had. The Dead Sea Scrolls by Vernon W. Matson Jr. and Other Important Discoveries. And it had a few of the tidbits that we talk about tonight, but it didn't have enough for me to be thrilled. So anyway, there's that as well.
Okay. I did a search on the internet to see if I could find anything about the guy who came through in 79. Nothing. I could find nothing about him, not his name, nothing. So now here's the church. Here's and their involvement. This is about the CD-ROM they put together. It's an article from the Y magazine. See, it's by Noel Reynolds, one of those professors. It's the 1996 issue. From the caves of Qumran to CD-ROM, and they're putting all those images together. That's BYU doing that. And then 1999, 3 years later, they finally got done. BYU produces Dead Sea Scroll database from the Church News, Window on the Ancient World. November 13th, 1999. It was a huge deal, and they should be very proud of themselves for that at BYU. Now, I'm going to go to this article, and this is what's so interesting, okay, is because this is an article. We read a paragraph about it before, about Hugh Nibley, and it's by Dana M. Pike, professor at BYU, very involved in the Dead Sea Scrolls research, who's writing this article, and he is going to, as I said, not spare the rod when it comes to amateurs making exaggerated claims about the Book of Mormon and how the Book of Mormon is not proved by the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we shouldn't get involved in that kind of ridiculousness. This is a BYU professor, okay, who knows what he's talking about. And that's why I think it's important to quote from this, because all of this stuff that he's saying about those who went before can be said about those who are doing it today. And we'll get to them in a second. And they're Ward Radio and Jonah Barnes. He's doing this all over the place. Jonah, you should pay special attention to what I'm going to read to you now. This is Dana Pike. There's also a guy over at Rise Zion. His name's Seth. He's doing the same kind of nonsense. All of what they're doing is addressed by these comments here. Okay. Here's Dana Pike. He says this. Oh, this is under countering ongoing ignorance and misinformation about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, he's laying down the law. This is an article from 2010. My own experience affirms that many Latter-day Saints have heard something about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but in reality know little accurate information about them. Unfortunately, some people's zeal to share what they find interesting about the scrolls outpaces the accuracy of their fireside presentations. He said the F word. This can be attributed to, among other things, a lack of personal familiarity with the content of the scrolls themselves. You don't know what you're talking about. The use of outdated secondary sources. I don't know, like maybe Hugh Nibley. A lack of careful assessment of the claims and secondary source material of any date, including Hugh Nibley. Remember, he said that Hugh Nibley, we can't be basing our knowledge of the Dead Sea Scrolls primarily on him. Okay? We can't do that anymore. And mixing of information about the Qumran text with other ancient but quite different manuscripts. See, remember what I said? They're talking about not only the Dead Sea Scrolls, but also Nag Hammadi. And he says, that's a problem. Mixing of information about the Qumran text with other ancient but quite different manuscripts, such as those discovered at Nag Hammadi, Egypt. Can you take this one, Bill?
Knowing the Qumran community was not a divinely authorized restoration group, but rather a protesting and reforming movement within the Jewish religion in the last century BC and the first century AD, Latter-day Saints should not expect to find a complete and accurate catalog of gospel truths preserved in the scrolls. I wish they would have told me that before the fireside. Okay. However, it is true that beyond the biblical text, there are some interesting but generally superficial similarities between passages in the sectarian Dead Sea Scrolls, those unique to the Qumran community, and Latter-day Saint organization and belief. For example, the community rule, IQ or 1QS 3, 16 to 25, claims that God created the Prince of Lights and the Angel of Darkness, who influenced people on the earth to follow truth or deceit. This may seem to Latter-day Saints like an aftermath of the so-called war in heaven. However, the Qumran texts never mention a war in heaven, nor a loss of status for the angel of darkness, in contrast to Satan being cast out of heaven. And they clearly include the false doctrine that God predestined not just foreordained people's
future. But before we go from this one, okay, notice he's saying that people, Mormon amateurs who are into making these parallels, may see a connection here. And they have made a connection there. He's not making this up, right? He's heard about them making the connection. He's not making the connections that he thinks they would make. So this is the kind of thing that they've done that he's aware of. And talking about the war in heaven and say, well, you know, it may talk about a creation of this guy and this guy, but it doesn't talk about a war in heaven. It doesn't talk about the angel of darkness, the Satan figure, being cast out of heaven. So in other words, you're reading an awful lot of Mormonism into these texts in order to make these parallels significant. And then he says, not only that, but also you got to account for all the doctrines that are in these Dead Sea Scrolls that are contradictory to Mormon doctrine, such as predestinationism. And that's a big thing in Mormonism if you're not a member. Some churches believe in predestination. Mormonism pushes back on that, says, no, we're not predestined. We're just foreordained to do certain things, but we still have the freedom to choose whether we will do it or not. Okay? And so foreordination, therefore, is contradictory to Mormon doctrine. And yet it's taught in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is what the people at Qumran believed was foreordination and fate and kismet. They clearly include the Dead Sea Scrolls, the false doctrine that God predestined, not just foreordained, and then it's people's mortal lives. Go ahead, Bill.
All right. So mortal lives and their fate in the life to come, as well as other doctrines not in harmony with restoration belief. Beyond what doctrine is already preserved in the Old Testament, the non-biblical scrolls preserve at best what I would call corrupted echoes of truth. Original truths not completely understood or preserved by the Qumran community that come to us in a vaguely familiar but corrupted condition. And I'll just say here, the way he's describing it, pretty much any religious faith that has a community and rules and, you know, considers itself to have ties to the ancient could look at these kinds of things and find something.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and you and I went to these firesides and presentations, and you sit through somebody talking for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you get 3 or 4 interesting tidbits spread out among the entire Nag Hammadi text and the Dead Sea Scrolls. It really is a needle in a haystack. It really is nothing.
Yeah, we got about 4 or 5 connections between the Book of Mormon and these two books. They're going to wow you.
There you go.
Yes. So I keep putting Dana Pikes. It looks like his business card, but I want to make sure that it continues to be identified that this is a BYU professor who's writing this. Okay. And he goes on. I hereby reaffirm my statement above, emphasizing scripture study must take precedence over trumpeting scroll study. However, trumpeting, yeah, he's got opinions about this, doesn't he? However, these are not mutually exclusive. And the more Latter-day Saints understand and properly utilize the Dead Sea Scrolls, along with other ancient Near Eastern texts, the more fully they will appreciate the richness of, notice he does not say the Book of Mormon. As they use these ancient texts, they can use them. They will more fully appreciate the richness of the Old and New Testaments in their own contexts. And that is undeniable, I think.
Yeah, it's not a connection to Mormonism. It's a connection to biblical criticism and biblical studies.
Yes. And the wonder is that, you know, these are from like the time of Jesus. And so the Christians got really, really excited about this before, you know, they got translated. Of course, now that everybody knows what's in them, the thrill is gone. BB King. Here we go. A second example of an off-sided, once again, this is Dana Pike, a second example of an off-sided superficial similarity involves the passage prescribing part of the governing structure of the Qumran community. You heard this, I heard this, we always hear this at every Dead Sea Scroll fireside. All right, it's the 12 men and the 3 priests. And here's the quote. In the council of the community, there shall be 12 men and 3 priests who are blameless in all that has been revealed from all the law. Now, a Mormon hears that and they go, it's the first presidency in the quorum of the 12. However, Dana Pike goes on. This leads to a common assumption that the leadership of the community included 3 priests and 12 other men. However, these priests were Aaronic priests, and the 12 men were Israelite males with no priesthood at all. Remember, it's 12 men and 3 priests. There's a distinction being made between men and priest, those who have and those who don't have the priesthood, and the priesthood they had was the Aaronic priesthood. Given the important role of priesthood leadership, priesthood keys, which were lacking at Qumran, in other words, I don't know if you're saying they didn't have them or they have no concept of them, and the significance of the numbers 3 and 12 in the Old Testament, 12 Israelite tribes is probably the basis for there being 12 apostles. It is hard for me to see how this passage provides specific support for the restoration, as some Latter-day Saints have implied. What do you think about that one, Bill?
I'll just say in regards to this 12 and 3, I was just looking up other information. I mean, you've got Jesus has his 12 disciples, and you got Peter, James, and John has 3.
Right, but it looks like, and what he's talking about there, I think, is, or has he even said it yet? Okay, can I just read this? Furthermore, it is not even clear from the New Testament. You see, this is what you're talking about. From the New Testament, that the church in the first century had a separate 3-member quorum of the first presidency in addition to the quorum of the 12 apostles, as the restored church does.
It seems exciting on the surface to a Latter-day Saint, but then when you go back into Judaism and you've got the 12 tribes of Israel, you've got the 3 main patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's plenty of just rational reasons that have nothing to do with Mormonism for why a religious group tied to Judaism would choose the numbers 12 and 3. It doesn't have to. Latter-day Saints get excited because it matches with their faith, but no Latter-day Saint touting that ever takes the time to consider where the numbers 12 and 3 might be used throughout lots of religions. For instance, if you're going to create a religious group, you need to be able to make decisions. So having an odd number is great, and you want as few people as possible. But 1 doesn't look good over the long haul because that one person can sort of do whatever they want. So often 3 is used in various places. The Jehovah's Witnesses emphasized the number 12. The Catholic Church had 12 early leaders when it started. I'm just looking at other things here. Unity School of Christianity used symbolic 12 powers of man. There's lots of entities that use these numbers that could go, oh, that's a sign that my religion is true. And all you have to do is just say there's 12 tribes and 3 main patriarchs, and that's enough to give a reason for this group to use that number without having it to mean anything else.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. He concludes this part by saying, finally, there is debate among scroll scholars over the interpretation of this passage. So maybe it doesn't mean that at all, with some rejecting the traditional view that this prescribes the form of the Qumran community's leadership. So there's some scholars out there who don't even think that's what it's talking about. And here it is, the rule of the community. This is from my Dead Sea Scrolls translated book. That's the name of the document. And here it is what they're talking about. In the community council, there shall be 12 men and 3 priests. See, men and priests. I actually had to slow down and see that myself. Men and priests, perfect in everything that has been revealed about all the law to implement truth, justice, judgment, compassionate love, and unassuming behavior. Yeah, that sounds like our 12 apostles in First Presidency. That was actually highlighted by me 20 years ago, and all these notes were made by me 20 years ago as well. But there it is. Now, here's a slide that you had created, Bill. Did you want to lead us on this one?
It is just emphasizing the same thing you just said, but it adds another point or two, and I'll just read the highlighted parts. However, scholars emphasize this is likely a common Jewish tradition rather than a direct link between the Qumran and the early Christians. In other words, both communities drew on biblical Israel's 12-tribe imagery for leadership organization. And then down below, rather than evidence that the Qumran sect was a proto-Christian church, scholarly consensus holds that the scrolls do not describe any Christian church, but rather a Jewish sect with parallel ideas. As John J. Collins observes, nothing in the scrolls either validates or discredits Christianity or Judaism. As they later evolved, they are valuable for context, which is what that scholar was saying before, that it would enrich your studies of the Old and New Testament. But it's not a direct confirmation of later religious claims.
Okay, very interesting. Can you hear that background noise, Bill?
I do not.
Okay, great. And also, you have 12 tribes. At the head of each tribe is a prince. So there are 12 individuals, of course. There's a person over each tribe. And so there's a connection there. There's Moses, of course, who's leading out of Egypt. But there's a couple of stories where he's paired with two others. And one is the battle of the Amalekites, where he's got his staff lifted up, his arms lifted up. And as long as he keeps them lifted up, the Israelites keep prevailing over the Amalekites. But it's a long day. He's getting older, and the arms start coming down. He gets tired. He can't keep them up. And that's when two men, Aaron, his brother, and Hur, H-U-R, stand next to him and hold up his arm so that the Israelites will continue to prevail.
And you only have to look at the New Testament in the book of Revelation. Somebody mentioned this in the comments. You've got the 144,000, which, by the way, is a derivative of 12.
Yeah.
I will just note Jehovah's Witnesses come along and they go, oh yeah, the 144,000. And they take a similar concept and they just extend it into their own theology. And when you look at the community at Qumran on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the first thing a rational person would do is to give them that sort of credit. Like, oh, they're going to take symbols and ideas that are behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And no one doing the study side of this as an intellectual exercise is going to come up with these things as being evidence for a future religious denomination that had no connection to that group.
Right. Well, Mormons are especially situated to want to find these connections because of its belief in dispensations, restorations, and this belief that there will come out of the ground additional records that will prove the truth of the Book of Mormon.
So far, a lot of things have come out of the ground, and none of them have proven the Book of Mormon.
No, but they keep trying. And today they're continuing to make the same mistakes, or actually different mistakes, just in the same vein as the earlier enthusiasts and amateurs did. And another potential first presidency echo, which I think is even more interesting, is Moses and his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam, who appear together in certain stories. Okay, continuing with Dana Pike. He says, although the Qumran texts occasionally hint at something that is not well preserved in the Old Testament, but that is believed by Latter-day Saints, okay? So he says, occasionally Dead Sea Scrolls will hint at something. Mormons believe it, but it's not well preserved in the Old Testament, right? They do not contain complete and unadulterated doctrinal truths other than what is already preserved in the Bible. So what he's saying, and this guy knows, and he's a Mormon professor, so he is motivated, if anything, to find connections, if there's connections, all right? He says the Dead Sea Scrolls do not contain complete and unadulterated doctrinal truths other than what is already preserved in the Bible. And I think the point of that is that your search for parallels is doomed at the beginning, because any parallel you can find between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Mormonism, you can find it in the Bible. So which is more likely, that Joseph Smith, that the Book of Mormon anticipated the Dead Sea Scrolls, or that Joseph Smith borrowed the idea from the Bible?
Yep.
I think that's what he's getting at there.
Mhm.
And he says, there are no new whole doctrines clearly preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls that only Latter-day Saints recognize. And that's the other part of it. It's not, there are some things that maybe there's some kind of connection, but it's hardly unique to Mormons. Okay. Other people believe in it too. So there's all sorts of problems with engaging in this enterprise, and you're doomed to failure on a number of fronts at the very outset. And he's laying them out here. Furthermore, he says, the Dead Sea Scrolls make no mention of several important doctrines that the Mormons believe in, right? Such as the fall, an infinite atonement by a redeemer, and saving ordinances that require the holy Melchizedek priesthood. Not there. Thus, in contrast to the Book of Mormon, because he's gonna quote, right, from Moses 7:62, which is the prophecy about additional records will come forth that will bear testimony of mine only begotten and his resurrection from the dead. Okay? The Dead Sea Scrolls don't do that. Therefore, they can't be fulfilling this prophecy. Therefore, these are not the books that the Mormons are expecting, and these are not the droids you're looking for. He says, thus, in contrast to the Book of Mormon, the Dead Sea Scrolls do not bear testimony of mine only begotten and his resurrection from the dead, and thus do not qualify as a specific fulfillment of the prophecy that truth will I, the Lord, send forth out of the earth, Moses 7:62. Wow. Now, this is a BYU professor. I mean, you would think that after this, nobody would be talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Mormon community and their connection with the Book of Mormon. In fact, I think that he even says that that's what he wants to have happen. He wants to make sure that this is mentioned over and over again. So we're basically doing what the good professor would have us do. Can you take this part?
Yep. So, therefore, one important and absolute necessity is to continue the effort to educate interested Latter day Saints about what the scrolls are, what they say, and what they do not say. I trust a sustained effort will help eliminate from among most Latter day Saints such totally false claims as, quote, the sacrament prayers are contained in the Dead Sea Scrolls, unquote. And, quote, the temple endowment and marriage sealing ceremony are preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, unquote. By the way, he's only saying those because he's heard those being said by others.
Yes.
It is most important for Latter-day Saints to appreciate the value of the scrolls and scroll fragments is not that they contain seemingly sensational proof text of the restoration, for they do not, but rather...
Can you hang on a second?
Please, yeah.
For they do not. The Dead Sea Scrolls do not contain do not contain sensational proof texts of the restoration. That's what Dana Pike is saying. Sorry.
But rather they include the oldest surviving copies of biblical text, and they illustrate the richness and variety of Jewish religious writings at the beginning of the Christian era. That's their value. Their value is they give us context of a time and place, and we can better understand what is happening when Jesus comes to be and lives out his life, whatever that was, whether that was divine or just a rebellious Jewish teacher. We can learn what kind of environment he did that in.
Very good. I know you think I'm never going to be done with this, but I will.
Oh,
this is so good. I couldn't resist. He continues, this need for accurate information is especially true among church missionaries and podcasters. No, wait, they didn't have podcasters back then. Among church missionaries and teachers, including seminary and institute teachers, so as to minimize the misinformation that is so often spread, unintentionally to be sure, about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, after tonight's episode, it will be intentionally over there at Rise Zion and over there at Jacob Barnes. No, it's Jonah Barnes, sorry. Jonah Barnes and the Midnight Mormons. Psych Word Radio, that's their new name. I commend, he says, and then he says, I commend these organizations because it's like the Maxwell Institute, because they are being scholastically honest. in their endeavors. And it's that scholastic integrity that he's exhibiting here by saying there's no connections, meaningful connections between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Mormonism. Oh, and this is a different person, okay? So we're done now with the original person we were talking to. Who was that? Was it Dana Pike? Thank you. Now we're going to quote from David Rolfe Seeley. Now, do you know Seeley? David Rolfe Seeley?
I do not. I know David Thoreau, and that's it. So I don't know David Rolfe Seeley.
Okay, he's another professor at BYU at the time, very involved in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Can you read this quote from David Rolfe Seeley that Dana Pike quotes in his article?
Returning to our focus on the Dead Sea Scrolls, as David Rolfe Seeley recently stated, quote, I think we, the Latter-day Saints, should study the non-biblical Dead Sea Scrolls just like we study religious texts from other religions that are not our own. If we go to them for added perspective and appreciation for the truth that we already have, we will gain greater insights. But if we go to the scrolls to prove the church is true, we won't be satisfied. We need to remember that the scroll writers were people who found themselves in a crisis with apostasy all around them. They sought a meaningful relationship with God, and they found something. And they found something. What they found was not the fullness of the gospel, yet it is still worth studying. But if we want to look just for parallels, then we would be better off just reading the scriptures.
Wow. So that's what David Rolfe Seeley has to say. In the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses, Mr. Real, shall every word be established. Okay. So now, Mormonism's love affair with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now we get to the third part in the 2020s, and where exaggerated Dead Sea Scroll claims resurface from Mormon amateurs. In some sense, you might wonder if they've ever really stopped, but they've certainly been coming fast and furious that I've seen in the last few years. Okay, so let's look at some of those examples, shall we? We've got a little bit of tape to play. Oh, not yet, though. Here is a couple of those podcasts from Ward Radio, and there's Jonah Barnes, Captain Apocrypha, Latter-day Saint perspectives on the Psalm scroll in the Dead Sea Scrolls. See, Dead Sea Scrolls will be marshaled again to prove Mormonism true. And that was about, it says 3 months ago, 15,000 views. People love this Dead Sea Scroll stuff. They always have. Another one, the ancients predicted Salt Lake City in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah. I want to actually listen to the thing. The best they can do is in 1930. They saw Salt Lake, but only in 1930 for some reason. I don't know why, but that's when the dimensions of Salt Lake City get close enough to what the Dead Sea Scrolls predict for the New Jerusalem, by the way, which also has a huge wall all the way around it and 12 gates, which I think Salt Lake is missing. I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Don't you think these guys just laugh all the way to the bank as they misrepresent things and just get a kick out of putting out a catchy thumbnail, saying some egregious extreme thing, and then just let some views come in? It's a lot harder to do this when you tell the truth and you put the documents up and you show the quotes. It becomes a much tougher business. And I'll just say that I think the other problem here, every generation has to learn the data all over for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I, you grew up, you joined the church in 78. I joined the church in 96. And I had a very similar experience to you. When we talk about our Mormonism, it's very similar. But I had to learn mine 20 years later. And I had to go through the same things that you did and read the same books and come to the same conclusions and then reevaluate and deconstruct. And, it's 2025. And if you are, in fact, a lazy learner, you are going to go find the catchy thing that gets you excited, but you never actually dive deep enough to realize that you're just rehashing old stuff that didn't add up the first time it was shared.
Well said. Oh, here's another one from Psych Ward Radio. Temple garments in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yes, temple garments are in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That would be news to Dana Pike and David Rolfe Seeley.
47,000 people tuned in for bullshit.
Well,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Oh, here's some more. Now, this is Rise Zion. That's a different podcast called Dead Sea Scrolls Prove Joseph Smith was right. And then another one from Psych Ward Radio. They get a lot of mileage out of the Dead Sea Scrolls because they've got Jacob. I keep saying Jacob. I apologize, Jonah. Jonah Hansen. Jonah Barnes, I know. Harrowing Hell. LDS doctrine discovered in Dead Sea Scrolls again. Okay. So pretty exciting stuff, huh? Now, we're going to play this clip here. So here is the guy from Rise Zion. His name is Seth. The thing I like the best about him is the orange sort of dragon. Is it a plushie or a huggy or whatever it is that's up on his shelf behind him? I'm sure that gives him a lot of comfort in the downtime. All I'm going to say about this is it's about a minute long, okay? He's going to use the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Great Isaiah Scroll to prove the Book of Mormon true by one letter. I'm going to let him make his argument, and then we'll go from there. So please pay attention as Seth presents his argument, and don't get distracted by the green dragon plushie in the background.
I just want to note, I'm exhausted already, and I'll tell you, if you see it on my face through the rest of the show, it's because I watched Ed Goebel today on Steve Pineker's show.
I would never watch that.
Explaining how the Book of Abraham adds up if you come up with a crazy, wacky theory where you find meanings that are multiple languages disconnected from the language you're examining. And there's three symbols. I'll say this. I know it has nothing to do with tonight's episode. One of the examples, and this is where I had to turn it off. He puts up the center of the hypocephalus, and there are three things there. And then he takes the first letter of each of those three things and says, that's why Joseph Smith was using this to talk about this other thing. And the three letters weren't even the right three letters, but one letter could mean one of these other letters at some other point in that language's history. And so by the time you see that, you're like, oh my God, you could find a connection anywhere. And so if you see me hitting my head against the wall while we do tonight's show, that's why. So here we go.
Oh, no, hold it. I gotta do a mea culpa on what I said. I would never watch that. Okay, I love you, Steve Pineker, and I think everybody should watch that show. The thing is that I have some warning, because I had encountered Ed Goebel over at Discuss Mormonism, what is now Discuss Mormonism, many years ago, for quite a while he was presenting what I think pretty much everybody considered his kooky theories about the Book of Abraham. And so when I saw that he was on, and I did see that he was on Steve Pineker's show. Help me. It's Mormon Book Review.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to be very careful and say it correctly because I don't want to say the one it's not.
Where an evangelical encounters the restoration.
Yeah, if I say the one that it's not and that it sounds kind of similar to in my head, I might start World War III. So that's why I want to be very careful about that. Okay. So, but everybody else should watch it. I was just saying that because I already know that Ed Goebel's well-considered position on the subject.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go back to Seth, Mr. Plushie.
Okay,
can you play that?
Yep, here it is.
Now let's go ahead and go on to the third variant, which is found in 2 Nephi chapter 16, verse 2, which is compared to Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2. And this is just a very simple correction. So the King James Version says, above it stood the seraphims, and the Book of Mormon says, above it stood the seraphim. Okay, so the Book of Mormon uses the correct seraphim without the S, a more accurate plural form based on the Hebrew grammar. In Hebrew, seraphim is actually plural already, and so adding the S is a mistake in the King James Version. Now, the Dead Sea Scroll version of Isaiah 6:2 also has the correct use of seraphim, matching the Book of Mormon. This might seem small, but it's just a precise correction that aligns with the ancient Hebrew text. How would Joseph Smith, a 24-year-old farmer, know to fix this little detail, right? If he's just copying directly from the King James Version of the Bible, and he gets that right. Okay, so.
Okay, this is an unfortunate example. So what I did was I went and I thought, well, is he right? And is this how it reflects in the 1830 version of the Book of Mormon? So I went and I grabbed my little 1830 version of the Book of Mormon, my little replica. And, this is what he says, right? And I think everybody caught what he said about his argument. Basically, that the Book of Mormon has seraphim, right? because the I am is plural in Hebrew. So if you say seraphim and you put an S on it, what you're doing is you're putting a plural on a plural. You're putting an English plural on a Hebrew plural. So the Book of Mormon has seraphim, which is correct. The Great Isaiah Scroll has seraphim, of course, because it's written by Jewish people at Qumran. It's the King James Version has seraphims, right? Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Was I seeing? Is this a dagger I see before me? The handle toward my hand. Michael, thank you so much. He says, I'm so glad you're responding to this. Oh, good. I'm glad that this is helpful. Okay, so that's the argument, right? And so I went and grabbed my copy of the Book of Mormon. I had to monkey around to find out where this part was in the Book of Mormon because there's different chapters. It's chapter 9 in 2nd Nephi, where it's replicating Isaiah 6 and his vision in the temple. And I was quite surprised to find that in the 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon, it still has the S at the end of seraphim. I even circled it in yellow there. Wait a second. Hold it. Seth, you told me that the Book of Mormon says above it stood the seraphim. And how could Joseph Smith, a barely literate young farm boy, have known this? Well, apparently he didn't know it. And he put the S on at the end. There's also another seraphim at the very bottom line here. It's still quoting from Isaiah, still copying from the King James Version, according to Seth's logic. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having the live coal, puts it on his tongue, etc. Okay. So then Bill went out and started doing some more research, and he was wondering, when was it that they took the S off seraphim? Because today, in today's version, the 1981 version of the Book of Mormon, that apparently Seth has access to, and only that one, it is seraphim. It did get corrected somewhere along the way. But Seth didn't think to go back to the 1830. So tell us what you found, Bill.
First off, I'll just say that what he did is egregious because the moment you see something, the natural question you and I immediately go to is, I wonder if it's in the original. And when you start with a belief that you have and everything is being looked at as a proof text, you don't ever go to the next set of questions you need to ask to be a good researcher and a critical thinker. You see the modern day Book of Mormon says seraphim, and you think Joseph Smith is a genius. So not only is it not in the 1830 first edition of the Book of Mormon, it's not in the 1837 Kirtland edition, it's not in the 1840 edition, and it's not until 1920 when it becomes obvious, by the way, all they're doing is making the correct grammatical correction. They see that seraphim has plural on a word that's already plural, and they fix it. The first time seraphim is spelled without the S on the end is the 1920 edition. Joseph Smith is long gone, dead, in the grave, although he is in his second grave at this point, I think. And because he's buried there in Nauvoo, and then I think the area floods and they have to move the burial site to some other spot. But I'll just note that it's just a normal correction. There is no revelatory process here. And he is 100% wrong when he credits Joseph Smith for being brilliant by using the Holy Ghost.
Right. And it was especially delicious because Seth says, how could Joseph have known? How could this 24-year-old uneducated farm boy have known, or wouldn't he have just been copying out of the, he basically suggests that if he had it the same way as the KJV, contrary to the Dead Sea Scroll, Great Isaiah Scroll, that would have been an indication that he was just copying out of the KJV, which he was. Which I think this proves. Okay.
But by the way, it's just, I don't want to take this episode so long, but what he actually ends up doing is showing that Joseph Smith has no access to real revelation in a moment that he thought he should have.
Yeah, the only thing Seth did not do was say, look closely. If you get it, you get it. Okay. Oh, yeah. And I had gone on to Seth's platform and made a little comment. I Googled gullible and got redirected here. You didn't make any comment about the little dragon up there. The little dragon plushie, the green thing?
Everybody's got a plushie in 2025. I've just got the canopic jars over there. So one of us is serious about toys, and the other of us is serious about Mormonism.
Ooh, ouch, zing. Oh, here's another slide that you'd gotten, Bill. Can you lead us through this?
Yep. So I was just looking for some other common threads between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Mormonism, or at least what at one time would have been claimed to be such. So there's a time where the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I remember this too from the Fireside, but they talked about like the law of consecration that the church practiced and that the Qumran community practiced the same thing. And so I went looking for something that would describe that. So it says the Qumran community lived a strictly communal life, sharing property and resources, eating communal meals, observing rules akin to later monastic orders. Ancient historians like Josephus and Philo confirm that the Essenes renounced private wealth and lived together under a rule, often compared to later Christian monasticism. In the New Testament, the earliest Christians in Jerusalem also held goods in common and lived cooperatively. Again, all you have to do is look at the same time other groups are doing it. It's not necessarily a foreshadowing of some future religious group that's unrelated, and they live cooperatively. The LDS Church leaders teach that this law of consecration or united order of communal sharing was part of the original church. And indeed, LDS communities in the 19th century experimented with communal economic living. The Dead Sea Scrolls demonstrate that such communal organization was not unique to Christians. A Jewish sect contemporaneous with Jesus also practiced an all things in common society. This does align with LDS assertions that Christ's church would have a united, holy community, though it challenges any notion that communal living alone is a distinguishing evidence of true Christianity or true Mormonism, since here is a non-Christian group doing the same thing.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Yep.
You know something that's interesting? ESSENES, this group that I think most scholars agree the Qumran community were the Essenes or the Essenes, but I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. That's why I was surprised to hear Jonah Barnes call them the Essenes. I don't think we have a clip of that, but it's Essenes, just so you know. John, I looked it up before I said that, okay? Just like I looked at the 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon before I went along with the idea that seraphim didn't have an S on the end in it.
I mispronounce things all the time, but I would never have called them the Essenes. So there we go.
Yes. Eeny, beeny, chili, Essenes. Oh, this okay. This is from Psych Ward Radio. You're going to love this one. This is one of my favorites, okay? But I've got to set it up. All right. This one I call Party Pooper Cardin. Every party needs a pooper. That's why we invited you. Party pooper. It's 2 minutes long. And here's what's going on, okay? Jonah Barnes is the one who's going to talk about the harrowing of hell, which is just an old term. And it basically means Jesus going down to hell, to this, we call it spirit prison, during, between the crucifixion and his resurrection during the 3 days. And he goes down there, he preaches the gospel to them, and he liberates them from hell. Okay? So, which is basically how it is that at the end of Matthew, all the bodies of the righteous get resurrected. I expect there's a connection there, although that's not made explicit. Okay. Now, having said that, there are a bunch of scriptures in the, is this the one that you play, or is this the one that I can move, Bill, the one that's up there?
This is the one you can move.
Oh, thank you. I just want to go ahead for a second, because there are all sorts of passages in the New Testament that refer to the harrowing of hell, this thing that Jesus did, and we know about it. We talk about it all the time in our church, right? The harrowing of hell is mentioned or suggested by several verses in the New Testament. This is from Wikipedia under the harrowing of hell, and you can see about 9 or 10 of them or so. Okay. So, having said that, this is a wonderful analysis of apologetics, because here's what Jonah Barnes is doing. I hope you're watching, Jonah. What Jonah Barnes is doing is he's going to talk about how the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about Jesus going down to hell, even though it's really not hell, it's the spirit world, right? Going down to hell to liberate the captive spirits. And he's going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls talking about this, and then show the parallel with what Mormons believe, right? Now, this magic trick is much more effective if you don't talk about the New Testament, okay? And how the New Testament refers to it all over the place.
1 Peter and 2 Peter.
Yes, very good. Very good. You didn't start off with Jude like Carden does, which gets us to the funny part. Okay. When you are an apologist and you're going to make a connection like this, you have to leave certain information out of the discussion. Because if you say that there's all these passages in the Dead Sea Scrolls that Joseph Smith would not have known about, and yet Mormonism believes in them, well, how can you explain that? If you include the fact that it's all over the New Testament as well, then that becomes less amazing. It becomes less miraculous. It becomes less faith promoting, because the ordinary person is going to say, what's more likely, that Joseph Smith got it from or anticipated the Dead Sea Scrolls, or that he got it from the Bible? Okay. Funny part here. I hope this buildup is worth it, okay? Because here's Jonah. Here's Jonah trying to sell this as best he can. And I'll be damned if codified Carden Ellis doesn't say, well, isn't that talked about in the New Testament? And watching the reaction from Jonah as his balloon gets popped is just hysterical. And watch him trying to get his feet back under him and go off in a different direction. You'll see what I mean here. It's great. And Carden's the one who goes with Jude first, but he does come around to Peter, so good for him.
Hey, boys, just keep thinking. You'll get there. Here it is.
Way for him. He didn't prepare the way for him here in mortality. That wasn't it.
Yeah.
He prepared the way for him in spirit prison. So, if we're faithful, we'll receive the record of John. Guys, we did. Section 138 is the fullness of the record of John.
Wow. Okay.
That's what it is. Okay. So,
cool.
and the Apocrypha helps us understand why. So I put some cool things in the Discord, some super cool pictures.
Okay, cool. I'm going to bust it out right now. So, which one of the super cool pictures? Are we talking about this guy right here?
Oh yeah, either one of those are great. So,
okay, cool.
The harrowing of hell was a doctrine that was had by the early Christians that they've now lost, right?
Okay.
And it is the idea that Christ, after he died, went down into the spirit world and freed the captives from death and hell, right? He harrowed hell.
Isn't that spoken of in the book of Jude or in Peter or something like that?
Yes. And in Peter it's mentioned. In Isaiah is free the captives. Peter says for that reason he went and preached to the spirits in hell. Paul talks about it. Yeah, it's mentioned.
Is this another one of those verses where all the sola scriptura pastors that say that like they're all about the Bible and the completeness and the inerrancy of the Bible, and like they don't even know that verse exists? They only know all the anti-Mormon ones, or what?
Yes, it is. And what I love about this particular part of the Apocrypha is that this part of the Apocrypha existed and was accepted and was all over the early Christian church and predates sections of the Gospel of John. Yet they don't include these books. They we're all about being accurate. God breathed scripture. It's like well, unless it contradicts your creeds, and then you don't like it.
Yeah.
And then you just throw it out summarily.
Yeah.
But so there's several apocryphal books that talk about this, what happened when Christ went into the spirit world. I believe these are the fullness of the record of John.
Okay. Your take on that, Bill?
It's the same thing. You're working backwards. So there is an idea in the New Testament. When we teach this, we were told all the time in Sunday school to refer back to 1 Peter and 2 Peter. So the fact that it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls is meaningless because it's quite obvious that Mormonism all along the way made the connection that the teaching was reinforced by New Testament scripture and not the book of Jude, but 1 Peter and 2 Peter.
And actually, it may not be 2 Peter. It may just be 1 Peter in two places. Is it 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 16 through 18 and chapter 4, verse 6?
Now I got to get my feet underneath me.
But did you see what happened? It was hysterical. It's like Laurel and Hardy. Here you got Hardy in there trying to make a point by leaving this piece out, right? Because if you leave the piece out, it's going to be a freaking miracle. And here comes his friend, Laurel, saying, hey, but I think you forgot about this piece.
Yeah, these are the games that get played, and it happens over and over and over again. And sadly, these guys don't care about, if you and I read the quotes you shared at the beginning, where the guy says, stop using these as proof text, use them to understand the Old and New Testament better.
Mhm.
You and I would have read that, and we would have gone, the Dead Sea Scrolls they're not useful to proving Mormonism true. Let's just walk away from that. And we did. We walked away from it.
We did.
These guys over and over and over again fail to ask the next logical question and do the right research and see the things that would then detract them from doing this kind of stuff. And you have to start to wonder if at some point it's simply about having a catchy thumbnail, saying something extreme, and trying to get a bunch of views.
This is why Jonah cannot stand talking about this kind of stuff to Carden, okay? Which comes out all over the place. It's really quite funny. He considers Carden to be skeptical, but instead Carden is actually just showing how the trick is done, inadvertently, innocently. Okay, so those are the scriptures that talk about the harrowing of hell. And there is another slide from you, Bill.
All right, so admission and discipline. Both the Qumran sect and the early Christian church were covenantal communities with defined entry requirements. I'm going to skip down to the very bottom. Folks can pause it. You can read the whole thing if you want to. LDS doctrine similarly teaches that Christ's original church was a disciplined community from which unrepentant sinners were removed, a practice continued in LDS governance. The Dead Sea Scrolls underscore that strict community boundaries and moral discipline were part of sectarian life in that era, lending context to early Christian practices. And I'll just note, every high demand fundamentalist religion, and most other religions too, have a punishment in place if you don't live the religion strictly. And there might be allowances or leniency in certain places, but Mormonism has that too, where it allowed the old people to break the word of wisdom for a few decades past when the rest of the membership had to get in line. If you can't use the discipline of Mormonism and the discipline of the people of the Dead Sea Scrolls and say, look, there's an evidence that the church is true. Rather, you would just note that all religions, especially high demand religions, have codes of behavior within the religion and certain things you can do and you will be expelled from the community. And that happens everywhere.
Yeah, and I would suggest that to a large extent, discipline is relative.
Yes. Sometimes it comes from your relatives too.
Yeah. Came from my dad a lot. Okay, you're going to love this one. And this is another Carden special, all right? Now, okay, Jonah in a different podcast. I got to keep a straight face here. It's too good. Jonah is going to be trying to make this this incredible connection here at this point in this podcast. There's a psalm that says, "Oh God, give ear to the words of my mouth." Now, when a Mormon hears that, Bill, what do you think?
Pele El.
Right, it's in the temple. And Elder Bednar said we can talk about this because it's not the signs or the tokens. There's a place in the temple where Adam is praying at an altar for God to appear. Satan appears, but he says, "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth. Oh God, hear the words of my mouth. Oh God, hear the words of my mouth." And repeated 3 times. And everybody does it as well as part of the ritual. So when you hear it in the psalm, it immediately, and it's actually, I think it's "hear the words of my mouth" in the temple, but it's obviously the same idea with everything else. "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth." Now, Jonah is reading and is already introduced, and it's an orange lettering on his screen, some psalms that are from the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are psalms in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think they have all the psalms, and then they have some more that are not in the Old Testament. And he is talking about those, but then he goes to Psalm 54, the one that is in the Old Testament, and he reads this, "Oh God, give ear to the words of my mouth." Carden loses his crap. He is so excited because Carden thinks that Jonah is reading from one of the Dead Sea Scrolls Psalms. And he asks him, and Jonah explains, no, this is just from Isaiah 50. No, Psalm 54, not Isaiah 54, from Psalm 54. Anybody could read this. And you can almost see the disappointment on poor Cardin's face. Because what he's saying is, yeah, Joseph Smith could have gotten it from there. It's in the Psalms. It's in the Bible, for crying out loud. He doesn't have to anticipate the Dead Sea Scrolls because this one is in the Bible. This confusion, I think, is priceless.
It also is just no different than you saying a prayer, I sang a prayer, and we go, God, please hear my prayer. Please. It's just another way of saying that. So across the entire scope of Judaism and Christianity, where prayer is central to the religious practice, would we not expect to see language have similarity, maybe even replicate itself in somebody else's expression of a request for God to hear the things that I say and am asking of you? It's just so normal to expect. It's not exciting at all. But here it is.
Songs which he spoke, all the songs which he spoke were 446. So there are 450. All of these he spoke in prophecy, which had been given him before the Most High. Okay, so these aren't just songs. These are prayers, and they're altar prayers. So David was saying these kneeling before the altar. This is in the temple, okay?
So you think this was like temple liturgy?
Yes. Oh, yeah, very much so. So if you don't believe me, we can turn to Psalm. Let's see. Here's just one that's really pretty. Psalm 54.
Okay.
Oh God, give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek after my soul. They have not set God before them. Selah. That's just a fun. I just like that.
Now
one,
that's
Psalm
the
54.
apocryphal.
No, that's in Psalms. That's Psalm 54. Anybody can read that.
In regular King James version.
Regular King James.
Mwah, mwah. I sympathize with Artie because, like, why are you bringing this up? Why is this amazing? Why is this important if it's in the freaking Bible?
Yeah, it's not. But he thought it was in the Apocrypha. It still isn't important, by the way, if it was or Dead Sea Scrolls or whatever. But even if it's in a text that Joseph Smith didn't have access to, in the scope of all the times of people in religious observance asking God to hear the words of their prayer, hear the words of my mouth, give ear to the words of my mouth. Like, there's so many variations of doing that you're bound to see a duplication of something that you think is unique to your religion, but some other religious person has professed their belief or their request of prayer in that way.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
What they need to do is have a psalm that has the temple endowment in it, not just one line from it that is pretty common, like you said.
And Joseph could have just gotten this from the Bible.
Oh, yeah. Here's another of your slides.
All right, so prophets in Revelation. Again, I'll skip down to the bolded or the highlighted part. The teacher's role as a living oracle, because they had a teacher. The teacher of righteousness was the leader of the Qumran community. And I remember in the fireside back in the 90s, they told us, like, this is similar to the role of a prophet, and here's the first presidency, and here's the quorum of the 12, and this is how the community works, and it's very similar to Mormonism, hence the church is true. But the teacher's role, the teacher of righteousness, the teacher's role as a living oracle parallels how Joseph Smith and his successors function in LDS belief as prophets receiving modern scripture. However, academically speaking, Qumran's revelations were tied to their unique interpretation of the Old Testament. They were not proclaiming new doctrine to the world at large, but deciphering ancient prophecies for their own community circumstances. This is just, if I can be a little offensive, this is just a cult. This is a group of Jewish people who broke off from the main group because they had their own fanatical ideas, and they have their own community. They create their own rules. They have their own leadership structure. And of course, you're going to have a leader who says, I talk to God, because that's what all high demand fundamentalist religions have, is a leadership structure where you don't have to worry about things. We talk to God straight from his ear or his mouth to our ears.
Well, Well, you know, when you call it a cult, Bill, Jonah Barnes is going, there's another connection with Mormonism.
There it is. They were not proclaiming new doctrine to the world at large, but deciphering ancient prophecies for their own community circumstances. It illustrates that the idea of a charismatic leader, it says prophetic leader, but charismatic leader was in the air in the time just before Christ, and it's also been in the air every moment prior to us, and it will be in every moment after us as well.
Yes. I'm glad you added that. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is from the Temple Garments and the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is actually something that's amazing. And, you know, it features Don Bradley, because Don Bradley has an insight that he's going to share with the boys. And the reaction, okay, I am not as impressed with this insight as the other guys are, which will be manifest by their exclamations and ejaculations of delight all over Carden's barn. I said barn. I'm sorry. I meant garage. So listen to what it is that that Don has to say, and then you can see what ensues.
Think about garments, right? You think about the symbols on the garments, right? You've actually got 4 symbols, but you have one symbol, then you have a repeated symbol. So it's really 3 different characters, you might say. Okay. So 4 sacred symbols, 2 of which are actually repetitions of each other. Okay. Now think about the sacred name of God in Hebrew, known as the tetragrammaton, YHWH in English, right? Yahweh. Okay. So it's 4 characters, but 2 of them repeat.
Yeah.
Okay. The H is a repeated symbol. Okay. So I would suggest that the garment is actually a representation of the sacred name of God. So when reading the scriptures about taking on us the name of Christ, in the temple, when we put on the garment, we are actually literally doing that. We are taking the sacred name of God and we are literally clothing ourselves with it. So we are putting on the name of God.
Dude. That was awesome.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I know I'm going to hear Don about this. But seriously, I think even Don would agree that their reaction to that might have been a little bit, you know, hyperbolic.
Wasn't that just a nothing? One thing has 4 with 2 sort of repeated. The other thing has 4 with 2 sort of repeated. And that doesn't happen anywhere else in the natural world.
And Jonah Barnes' head explodes. By the way, Bill, your name does that. Not only your first name, but your last name as well.
That's because I'm a prophet, RFM, and all of you should be sending me your money and not watching those fools.
What it means is when we put on our garments, we're actually putting on Bill Reel.
Jasmine Height, you can take Don aside, put your arm around him, and say, Don, come on. That's a nothing. It's
not a nothing. I mean,
it's something, but it's pretty much a nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the guys liked it. This is why they call them psych word radio.
Yeah. They get excited about anything, don't they?
Yes, they do.
I caught 2 of the same kind of fish in a row.
It was amazing.
It's a miracle.
Yes. They go into the rooms with the double padding on the walls. Oh, my goodness. Oh, but we're not quite done. However, there's more to the show, but we are winding up.
Yeah, there's actually a little ways to go, but I wanted to throw this somewhere into the middle and just have a conversation with folks. I didn't want to do it at the beginning so we don't lose the folks who were tuning in for the first time. But RFM and I will be going to Salt Lake City for Sunstone. I'll be at Sunstone on Friday around 4:30 doing a 1-hour session on some things to do with the Book of Abraham. And RFM will be there on Saturday. Do you know roughly what time your session is and what your topic is?
10:25 a.m. I'll be there for an hour and a half talking about me beating the Book of Mormon challenge.
Nice. So we will be at Sunstone. So please register for Sunstone. We'd love to see you guys there. But then also we're having an event Saturday night. in Salt Lake City. This will be at the Boys and Girls Club in Salt Lake City. The address and stuff is in there. It's $125 a ticket. That does include the meal. We did an event just down here in Southern Utah. We opened it up to 40 tickets or so. We ended up with maybe 43 people. A few people sort of snuck in outside the norm. But they did pay, by the way, just FYI, to the folks who are thinking, how do you get in for free? But this one, we have a little bit more space. And so because it's Salt Lake City, we figure there's going to be a lot more people. I think we have 60 tickets available for this. There's already a few of them that are sold.
There's how many sold?
There's just a few of them, maybe 3 or 4 of them. But folks, if you would please, if you want to come visit with us, hang out with us, this will be from 5 p.m. till 10 p.m. So this will go for quite a little ways. And so we'll have food there provided. I think dinner will be sometime around 6. If you want to show up then, that's great. But if you want to get there a little early, I'll be there early. RFM, do you know roughly if you'll be there at 5 or if you got other things at Sunstone going on up until then?
No.
Okay.
I'll be
We'll both be there. We'd really love to enjoy your guys' company, get to know all of you better. We'll give you guys a chance to tell a little bit of your story, and we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll have some other conversations and try to get you to laugh, as well as inform you on some cool things that maybe we've never shared before, and ask anybody who's went to the Southern Utah one. I think they all had a blast, and I think you will have a blast at this one too. So hopefully we'll see you. You can, I'll put the link in the chat as soon as I get done talking, so I'm not doing 2 things at once because I can barely manage one. And then I'll just note, outside of that, the top one there is our mailing list. We'd love for you to join that. We send an email out every other month or so. We just notify you of like the top episodes that have come out recently. We try to point you to things that Mormonism Live has covered or Radio Free Mormons covered. You can support the cause. Donations have not significant, like some big major drop or something, but they've dropped down a little bit, and we really do need your help. And so if you've never supported the show, but you're a big fan, we'd love it if you became a supporter, a donor to the show. Please go to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button. That link takes you to the umbrella entity. You can donate there as well. There's a drop-down window. You can just hit the drop-down window, donate to Radio Free Mormon, donate to Mormonism Live, whatever your favorite show is. $5 a month, $10 a month. But we really do need your help to be able to do this long term and to keep this going for years and years on end. And we'll continue to be here so long as we have the ability to do that. Like and subscribe on YouTube. If you're enjoying our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss an episode. And then the event there, join us in person. That's got the link there, but I will post it in the chat as soon as I'm done here. And then also somebody at the last event said, I don't want to go to every one of these, but I want to show up to 1 or 2 a year. But what I do want to do, I've got the financial means. I'd like to help other people go. And so I just created a campaign on our donor box that allows you to donate to a scholarship. And so you can put money in, and that money will be solely used for people who reach out to us and say they want to go to these things, but they don't have the financial means. And so if you would like to sponsor someone else's ability to attend one of these events, please do go to that link there, and I'll post all of these in the chat as soon as I get finished. I'll just note, if you have a financial need and you'd like to come to one of these events, reach out to me, and I'll put the email there too as well. We're really trying to step up this year and get out to a few areas where there's a lot of Latter-day Saints, make some personal appearances, and give you guys a chance to interact with us, get to know you, and let you know how much we appreciate you. And I, we get so many comments of how much you guys appreciate what we do, but we want you to know that goes the other direction as well. We're so appreciative of what you do to support our show and to tune in every week and to consistently show up in our audience. So thank you to all of you who do that.
Amen. And now coming around the clubhouse turn, I hope, with another slide from Bill.
Yeah, so I'll share those links here in just a second. So perhaps the most striking parallel to later Christian language is the Qumran sect's self-description as a covenant people.
Well, the Jews weren't a covenant people.
Yeah, that's my point, by the way. You can see it coming. You can see it coming. The scrolls show.
Rabbi Joe knows I was kidding. He probably just had a heart attack.
By the way, this was not something that was said to us necessarily in the 90s, because the covenant path and emphasizing us as a covenant people has really been something that got big in the last few years. But We did mention it from time to time, but it wasn't something I mentioned in these firesides. I will say the scrolls show a partial alignment with LDS perspectives. They illustrate that the idea of a righteous remnant bound by a special covenant with God, distinct from mainstream religion, did exist in that era, much as Latter-day Saints believe a covenant people was set apart in antiquity. On the other hand, Qumran's new covenant was quite different in content from the Christian gospel covenant or the Mormon covenant people, underscoring that similar terminology doesn't equal identical doctrine.
Do they have the new and everlasting covenant?
I don't think so, but Jesus mentioned a new and everlasting covenant anyway. I'll just note, sometimes the language is the same, and the apologists will see that as a bullseye. When you dive into the word, it ends up meaning something completely different, and their idea of what a covenant was in their community versus what it is in Christianity or what it is in Mormonism are just apples and oranges.
Very good. Were you going to take this one too, Bill?
I guess I've got this one too. Sorry. The Qumran's writings contain messianic hopes, but not exactly the same as Christian Messianism. The sect expected two anointed figures. I think this is cool. Commonly interpreted as a priestly Messiah, sometimes called the Messiah of Aaron, and a kingly Messiah, the Messiah of Israel and David's line. And this shouldn't be that strange because in many ways, Judaism did the same thing. And even Christianity, to some degree, expected there to be more than one Messiah, somebody who would come originally and then somebody who would show up later and do other kinds of things. Some texts also speak of a coming prophet, echoing Deuteronomy 18:15, alongside the two Messiahs. The two Messiah doctrine is clearly at odds with Orthodox Christianity in the modern moment. It's also at odds with Mormonism, although Mormonism plays into this with things like, what is it, the anointed servant? There's what's the other person who's supposed to come someday? And some people suspect that
The
maybe
Messiah ben Joseph.
Yes. Something else. Like they thought Denver Snuffer might be him or something.
Oh, you mean the one mighty and strong?
The one mighty and strong. And so Mormonism in its periphery has some of this as well. But it is to note that Orthodox Mormonism, if you can say such a thing, is centered on one person as the Savior, Jesus Christ. And again, this isn't a similarity that people are pointing out in terms of two messiahs as evidence, because it's not. But they will point to them talking about their hope of a Messiah who comes and connect that to Christianity, when Christianity started because Judaism is expecting a Messiah. Jesus excited the Jews who believed in him because they had lived their whole life waiting for the Messiah to come. And it isn't a Christian thing solely. And so it's just in the air, I guess is all I would want to say about that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Do you want me to read this one?
You can do that, please. I'll share those links while you're doing that.
Baptism and ritual immersion. This was a big thing. Remember, they always had a slide up there. It was usually this slide or something similar. They've got a structure there. It's in the ground. Could be a jacuzzi, could be a hot tub, but it's at Qumran. Okay. So what are they doing with that? Well, they're obviously going down there and baptizing people by immersion the same way that the Mormons do. That's what Mormons think. Baptism and ritual immersion. Mormon apologists. Among the most often noted parallels between the Dead Sea Scrolls community and early Christianity is the practice of ritual immersion in water. The Qumran sect performed frequent washings for purification. Archaeologists have uncovered many mikvaot, or ritual baths, at the site. These washings symbolized repentance and cleansing from sin. Did you have anything you wanted to say about that, Bill?
I won't say every, because that's hyperbole. Almost every religion has some way in which you can get clean or have your sins removed. And many of them tied to Christianity and Judaism have baptism. And baptism by immersion isn't this new thing that Mormons decided to do. Mormons capitalized on the idea that Catholics got away from it and started doing sprinkling. But there are lots of Christian sects that do full immersion, and it's not a Mormon thing. And so finding some group around the time of Christ who baptized by immersion has no strength of evidence in correlation to Mormonism being true whatsoever.
Let me start with the last thing I was going to say, which is that you had said that another group is baptizing. Well, they're not baptizing. That was one of the key things, right? They're washing. And this has to do with purification. Water cleans. And so the association with washing and water with purification is almost irresistible, not just in this community, but throughout the world. So you find it in lots of different places. Okay, so
I'll say one more thing.
Reynolds will have something to say about this as well later on. What did you want to say, Bill?
I'll just say, and then you'll have some Mormons who wanted to connect this to like the temple and the washing and anointing. But that doesn't help either, because Jesus is washing feet and doing a similar thing. You got Mary and Martha. One of them is wiping the Christ's feet with their tears. There's plenty of instances of washing rituals throughout Christianity, in various places, and I think Judaism as well. That this it doesn't have any special importance.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in Exodus. Chapter 18 is coming to mind, but it may not be correct. Maybe that's the robes that were worn, which sometimes apologists get all excited and then liken to the temple robes. Okay. Oh, the sacred mushroom and the cross. The tale of John M. Allegro.
I've got a few slides in here that are just interesting side notes around the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're not connected to the Mormon angle. This was a cool book. The idea behind this book was that early Christian religion and Judaism, Old Testament, New Testament as well, that the reason visions and sacred experiences happen because those who had those visionary experiences were using psychedelic drugs. And so this book gets mentioned a lot in places where people are talking about magic mushrooms and different psychedelics. But it's important to note, in the early days amidst scholarly secrecy, one maverick scholar on the original team, John Allegro, went rogue with sensational claims. In 1956, Allegro suggested the scrolls hinted at early Christian origins, even claiming a scroll spoke of a crucified leader and a resurrection prophecy that predated Jesus. So he's doing the same thing that the apologists were doing in Mormonism. He's trying to fight for some deeper truth that was hidden, and he's over exaggerating what's in there. Specifically, Allegro interpreted the scrolls as if the teacher of righteousness had been executed and the sect expected his return. His senior colleagues vehemently disagreed, saying no such passages exist. And indeed, modern consensus is that Allegro misread and overinterpreted fragments. So he's their version of Hugh Nibley. But Allegro wasn't done. In 1970, he published The Sacred Mushroom and Cross.
But he's more fun at a party.
He is. This guy's a lot more fun at the party. Wherein he argued that Christianity began as a fertility cult involving hallucinating on psychedelic mushrooms. And then I'll just shorten this here by saying that turns out, again, he's misunderstanding some things. There is some evidence out there that there's truth to some of this, but he's also overstating some of the evidence. I only bring this up because this book has a following. There are people who, even I've heard several Joe Rogan interviews where it's been mentioned. I've seen this mentioned other places. I've been in conversations with groups of people where this book gets brought up. And I just wanted people to know a little bit of the backstory there. But some of his theory is based on misunderstandings or over exaggerating of what's in the scrolls.
It's possible for somebody, scholar or non, to want something to be true too much.
Yep, very much so. And then I think this might be the last two ones with the picture. Might be one more. The copper scroll. This is a cool one. The treasure map from antiquity. Not all scrolls are parchment or papyrus. One is made of a metal and reads like an ancient treasure map.
Wait, metal? You mean like gold or brass?
This is copper.
Mormon is true. Hello.
Gold plates. Discovered in 1952 in Cave 3, the copper scroll was so oxidized that it could not be unrolled. Ultimately, it was cut into strips to be read.
By the way, Bill,
yes.
Bill, I'm so sorry. This reminds me, a listener had commented to me. Remember when we were talking about tumbaga?
Yes.
And tumbaga can be any mixture of gold and copper, regardless of the proportions. but that in order for the whole problem is that gold weighs too much, and Joseph Smith couldn't have run with it or probably even really lifted it up to around 200 pounds given the dimensions. So therefore they go to Tumbaga, which has copper in it, but copper has to have a whole lot of copper in it before it's going to make it something that's feasible for Joseph Smith to pick up and run with in the middle of the night. In fact, it has to be a majority copper.
And then
So
it's not gold anymore.
I'm sorry, what?
And then it's not gold anymore.
It's not gold. And the other problem is not only does the problem with the witnesses, and they say it has the appearance of gold, but it would look like copper. The other problem is it would have been green.
Yes. And you can do a chemical process to make Tumbaga have the appearance of gold. But then you got to ask, why would they do that?
Yeah.
So there's that.
It's inscrutable, those Nephites.
Okay, I'll finish this part here. Instead of religious text or scripture, this scroll lists 64 locations of buried treasures. People have tried to find it, never been able to find any treasures. Either tombs or caves have already been raided, but nothing ever turned up. It's essentially a 2,000-year-old treasure manifest. The only scroll that was literally engraved on metal, whether the treasure is real or metaphorical, remains unsolved. The copper scroll today is displayed in the Jordan Museum, tantalizing viewers with the possibility that the great hoards of ancient wealth may still lie hidden in in the regions, caves, and valleys. It's the stuff of real life adventure legend. Because they had to cut it in strips, obviously it exists, but it's displayed in the strips that it was cut into. But they did make replicas, and this is just a replica of that copper scroll. So there is that one.
Here's the great Isaiah scroll.
And this is just to note what you were talking about earlier, which is that this Qumran scroll contains the entire book of Isaiah in Hebrew, copied around the 2nd century BC. It's over 1,000 years older than the medieval Masoretic manuscripts, yet it's largely identical in content, affirming the preservation of the biblical text over centuries. So when we find things like this, they convey to us that the documents as we have them today, the wording of Isaiah is, for the most part, pretty well preserved from generation to generation, because this is almost identical to what we know Isaiah to be.
Yes. And we also know that the great Isaiah scroll ends up proving the Book of Mormon true by not having an S at the end of seraphim.
Yes.
Just didn't want anybody to forget that. Okay, so here is, and we're closing up here, but this is Noel B. Reynolds. This is our third witness. He's a BYU professor. He's involved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he writes an article, which we're just going to quote a little bit from, but this is 2003. All right? Okay, about Noel Reynolds. This is the guy. He's an emeritus professor in 2003. Oh, I think he is now. This information should be current. Of political science at Brigham Young University, where he taught a broad range of courses in legal and political philosophy, American heritage, and the Book of Mormon. His research and publications are based on these fields and several others, including authorship studies, Mormon history, Christian history, and theology, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, he went to a pretty good school. He's probably read a couple books. And here's what he has to say, okay? Noel Reynolds, do Dead Sea Scrolls link to Mormonism? That is his title of this section of his paper. The Dead Sea Scrolls, he says, have sometimes been alleged to contain teachings that would somehow link to or vindicate Mormonism. Unfortunately, most such claims have tended to be sensationalistic. I really hope that Seth and Jonah are watching, especially Jonah. I don't want to deflate anyone by saying that, but I think it's important to deal with the facts. You want to read this one, Bill?
Some of those claims dating back to the 1960s and 70s, before people really knew much about the scrolls, were quite inflated and were not based on competent study of the scrolls. It's true that the writing of the Essenes gives hints of things that Mormons take very seriously. For example, the idea of pre-existence and a war in heaven. But it's also clear that the Essenes did not have a developed understanding of these concepts the way we would think about them. They had a developed understanding that was different than the way we thought about them. Right? Isn't that more fair to say? Like, even the way he's wording it is still off. He's sort of implying these guys have an echo of it.
Mhm.
They don't really have it all. We've got it all. When in reality, it's very different, similar sort of articulation, but they have their own theology that's completely unique from Mormonism, and they have their own way of putting these kinds of things together. Yeah. Okay. They didn't even have a concept of the plan of salvation. Every religion has some sort of plan of salvation. They just didn't state it in the scrolls, which is fundamental to that idea of pre-existence from our perspective. Sorry, I had to chime in there.
No, I'm glad that you did, because what it shows is, I mean, he is a BYU professor. He's involved in FARMS. He's written papers for FARMS. He wrote one significant one that I'm aware of. Doesn't have to do with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but actually I think moved the needle on Book of Mormon studies, having to do with Nephi's relationship to the author. That Nephi wrote the small plates in order to validate his position as king vis-a-vis his older brother who should have become king. So anyway, I thought that was a very important piece that he wrote, but he knows what he's talking about here. But he's very, very pro-Mormon, and it comes out in what he writes, even though what he's writing is there's no connection with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's what I think makes it valuable. It's not just you and me saying it. It's Noel B. Reynolds, it's Dana Pike, it's David Rolfe Seeley. He goes, oh, this is about those baptisms, right? Noel says, I've already mentioned the idea of ritual immersions as sometimes thought to be evidence of baptisms. This is not the case, as these are just daily cleansings, and they have nothing to do with the making of a covenant, which is the way that we understand baptism.
Yeah.
Okay, then I wanted to put in here this BYUH professor. I didn't know he's at BYU Hawaii. When did he get stuck out in Hawaii? This is Carrie Mulestein. I put a couple pictures on there. So this is from BYU Hawaii, their news. It was March 10th, 2006, I think it was, that he goes out there to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Our friend here is Carrie Mulestein. Right.
I'm really sorry. I was
trying to play that because I actually have that slide.
I was going to play a bit of Carrie Mulestein.
I have the slide with that quote.
Oh, I got you. I'll play it when you get to it then.
Thank you. That's great. Yep. I'm glad you have that. And so these are the things that he said and wrote, Carrie Mulestein, where he says, turning to why Latter-day Saints care so much about the Dead Sea Scrolls, Mulestein said, one of the reasons is because they see a lot of parallels between either themselves or actually more so with the peoples of the Book of Mormon. Some of the examples he cited that are also familiar to some other Christians include, and I circled this one here. This is the list right here. It doesn't go beyond the bottom of the slide. They had rituals that seemed to be like baptism. Carrie Mulestein uses that, even though Noel Reynolds, who actually knows about the Dead Sea Scrolls, says, no, it's not the case. These are just daily cleansings. But Carrie Mulestein, in his ongoing quest to build faith in Latter-day Saints based upon things that are not true, likens them to baptism, just like the enthusiastic amateurs of days gone by.
Yeah,
and there we are. And once again, he's following his methodology though to a T.
That the Book of Abraham and the Book of Mormon and anything else, excuse me, that we get from the restored gospel is true. Therefore, any evidence I find, I will try and fit into that paradigm.
And he's doing the same thing with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Good job, Carrie.
By the way, this is the same guy who showed the Leiden papyrus.
Yes.
I-384 with
the lion couch.
Yeah, the lion couch scene. I'm trying to think of if it's the dead person upon the couch or if it's one of the Egyptian gods. But there's a person on the couch, and Harry points at the spell down below and says, "Look what it says. It says Abraham upon the couch."
Yes.
And it doesn't say that. And this is an Egyptologist. If he doesn't know this, we're going to have trouble figuring out inside church circles what it does say. What it doesn't say is that it's Abraham upon the couch.
See, this is what I'm talking about. When you want too badly for something to be true, you will actually add words that aren't there that end up making your point stronger than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, the quote on the screen is exactly what he does. He's telling you, he's showing his cards. We wouldn't expect him to do that. He said the quiet thing out loud. He said, I'm going to form my conclusion that the church is true, and then everything else I do going forward will support that. I will not do anything different than that.
The reason why you're not supposed to say this out loud is because it brands you as a crank.
Yep.
He's a crank. He's a hack. He's not a scholar. He's a tool. He's got Husqvarna on his forehead. Okay.
More like
Enough
Ryobi, but yes.
I'm sorry, what?
More like Ryobi, but yes.
I'm guessing you don't like Ryobi so much. Are they lesser quality?
Husqvarna makes a great product. Ryobi,
Yeah.
might as well go to Harbor Freight.
Well, here's what Noel Reynolds also has to say about Jesus. Although the Essenes were very focused on a coming Messiah, I should say the Essenes in honor of Jonah. Although the Essenes, those weenies, the Essenes, were very focused on a coming Messiah, they still had not recognized Jesus Christ as that Messiah at the time Qumran was destroyed by the Romans in 68 AD. Okay, this would be an important thing, right? This would be an important connection between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Mormon. Yeah, there's no Jesus. Remember how many times the Book of Mormon mentions Jesus and all of his different names, Bill? They got 100 names for Jesus in there. Remember that? Susan Easton Black did that research back in the late 70s. And you know, you can't turn a page without running into Jesus in the Book of Mormon, but they didn't have him in any of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's a problem. Noel B. Reynolds says. They were looking for a powerful king. That's the Messiah. That's the Jewish Messiah. That's the Christian Messiah too, by the way, now. They were looking for a powerful king who would liberate Israel and destroy the sons of darkness. They were not looking for a humble teacher that would sacrifice his life. And then he says, oh, the great Isaiah scroll. The great Isaiah scroll from Qumran is not the same as the Masoretic text. That's the one from 1000 CE. There are many little differences. So there's a lot of little variants between the Masoretic text from around 1000 CE and the Qumran great Isaiah scroll from around the 2nd century BCE. So around 1200 years, give or take, difference. That's huge. But he says this, there are many little differences between the two. One or two of those differences correspond exactly with the Book of Mormon version of Isaiah. Just doesn't happen to be Seraphim. I don't think that proves much. That's what Noel B. Reynolds says. I don't think that proves, he's right. I don't think that proves much, but it is more interesting than having the differences all be different. So he says, you know, there's a ton of differences, and there's a few differences that are the same between, you know, the Book of Mormon Isaiah and the great Isaiah scroll, but I don't think it proves anything. And he says it was more interesting than if there weren't any similarities. That's what I think he means when he says, then having the differences all be different. In fact, statistically speaking, Bill, it would be much less likely to have no similarities.
It would be much more unlikely to have no similarities.
Did I say likely, much more likely?
I think you said the opposite, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Because I meant it would be statistically extremely unlikely when you're dealing with numbers like this of a certain size to have absolutely no similarities between the two.
And
That's
you're talking about
this. I'm sorry, I was going to say that's the kid who takes the true or false test with 100 questions on it and gets them all wrong. It's not by chance. Yeah,
there's enough similarity between all of these Christian and Jewish sects that as you point out, it would be an anomaly not to find some overlap somewhere, and hence this is evidence, as we pointed out all night, this is evidence of nothing. Yeah, and he's going to put the best spin on it he can for the widow in Parowan. I don't think that proves much, but it is more interesting than having the differences all be different. It suggests that there may have been a common tradition, an older tradition, that is preserved in the plates of brass that Nephi was using that also was preserved in Qumran. Okay, so suggests may have been a common. Yeah, he's just throwing that out there. He doesn't think it proves much. Meh, it could be this. But much more likely not. And there are some of those caves. You can see them down there.
at Qumran. So, Bill, that's the last slide we have. What do you think about tonight's show?
Let me take that down and put that up. That was great. I'm going to put the banner up if somebody wants to call into the show. I meant to do that a minute or two earlier. Sorry about that. I think it's great. I mean, this is something that if you're a little older, if you're younger, maybe you've heard sort of the revitalization of these kooky apologetics that the Dead Sea Scrolls equal evidence in the church. Maybe you've been listening to Word Radio or Jacob Hansen or some of these other guys when they spout this kind of stuff. But for RFM and I, we went through this decades ago and learned really quickly that there really just wasn't anything of any substance there. But I will say, while we wait for phone calls, numbers on the screen, 662-667-6667. And I will put in the live chat the link if you want to come directly into the show. You can do that too. If you want to be anonymous, make sure your camera's off. And you can do that when you enter the studio. We won't see you until you are ready and you say to enter. But there is another evidence that we talked about on the phone, but neither one of us put it in the slideshow. And it's the one I find the most interesting, actually. So it's this idea that the people at Qumran would have been called Latter-day Saints. So I'll just read this paragraph because I think this actually, I did not have any way to find out if this still holds up. But when RFM and I learned about the Dead Sea Scrolls back in the 80s and 90s, this was the one that got me the most excited. And I thought was the strongest piece of evidence among the 3 or 4 connections that people would share. The whole theme of religion is eternal life, but beings who would live forever must be prepared to do so. They must be perfect. Nothing but perfection will do for an order of existence that is to last forever and ever. The striving for perfection is the theme of the rule of community. The sectaries of Qumran knew that the greatest of all prizes was not to be cheaply bought, that there could be no cheating or cutting corners to prepare for eternity. One must be willing to go all the way. Whatever may have been their human failings, these people, as the Roman Catholic scholar George Molen observed, must be taken seriously and viewed with great respect. The proper title for them, the name they gave themselves, he maintains. The Catholic scholar, Roman Catholic scholar George Molen. And I remember when this was pointed out to me, I went to the fireside and they shared this one. And the guy was making a big deal out of it because he said, this isn't coming from us. This is coming from a non-Mormon scholar. This is a Catholic scholar. The proper title for them, the name they gave themselves, he maintains, is Latter-day Saints. And he deplores the preemption of that name at the present time by a so-called Christian sect. A careful reading of the rule of community will show that it has a great deal in common with the Book of Breathing. So now it's a book of Abraham connection. But this, where a Roman Catholic scholar is sort of pissed that this modern church calls itself the Latter-day Saints, when in reality that name should be reserved for the people at Qumran.
Okay, so you look at that and you go, wait a second, because the implication is that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they refer to themselves as Latter-day Saints. They don't. They don't. Now, this Catholic scholar may have thought that this is what they would call themselves, that they were saints who lived in the last days, and that's like the Mormons. But that title, Latter-day Saints, is exactly and equally as applicable to the early Christians. They considered themselves Latter-day Saints as well. So I don't think it's that exclusive.
And I just wanted to show what this was. If people wanted to find it themselves, I just need to minimize this just a little bit. This was Hugh Nibley from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It says 2010, but that can't be the case.
No.
So I'm trying to find an actual date on this. It looks like it's part of a book from 1975. So again, this is part of that outdated research. I have not heard anyone using that piece of evidence in the last 2 decades, 3 decades.
What is his source for this? Is this a personal anecdote?
He got it from Preston Nibley, who got it from Joseph Fielding Smith, who got it from Joseph F. Smith, who got it from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So
it must be true then.
It must be true. So there's that one. I thought that'd be a cool little thing to add in.
Thank you, because I know we talked about it earlier, and then we couldn't find it, and you found it.
And I apologize. Because I was talking there, the call-in studio had not started. So it is up and running now. If somebody was trying to call, please do call in. We'd love to have your comments about any of your experiences. I'm sure that some of you saw this circuit tour of various people talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. We'd love to know what it meant to you at the time. What do you think about the Dead Sea Scrolls now? And if you want to do that, and then RFM, if I can beg you to chat for just a minute while I get a phone call connected to the thing, that'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my very, very best. I think I told all my great stories, but I was just very, very intrigued by this. And it wasn't just me. So many people were intrigued by this, hence the Packed Stake Center Chapel. And we were just grooving on this so much. We loved it. For us, this was total confirmation that our hopes and our faith were not misplaced, but that the church really was true and that Spencer Kimball really did see Jesus every Thursday in the Salt Lake Temple on the 4th floor for brunch. And the other apostles did too. And that's why they were able to be sure witnesses. By the way, that's another thing that in my day, I never thought I'd be saying that. Back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, everybody knew that the apostles saw Jesus, and that's what made them special witnesses. And they would craft, a lot of them, not all of them, some of them would craft their testimonies in such a way as to really, really lay it on thick and give the impression that they had seen Jesus, but they're not actually saying they saw Jesus. But yeah, we saw Jesus, and we all know we saw Jesus. We just can't say it for some reason, about casting pearls before swine. And so that kind of faded a bit, because I think Elder Oaks actually tried to tamp that down a bit by making a few comments, like in Boise, at the Boise rescue, where they're trying to rescue the Mormons from Denver Snuffer. And he says that just because apostles are called special witnesses doesn't mean they've seen Jesus. Of course, he was quick to follow it up by saying, but it also doesn't mean that they haven't seen Jesus. But anyway, so now that's coming back too, along with all the second coming drum beating and the apostles seeing Jesus. And they're seeing a lot of him lately, I understand, because there's a lot of details to iron out. This whole second coming business is more complicated than anybody expected.
I think I've got Tim Rathbone on the line. So, Tim, how are you? Hello.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Excellent. What are you thinking about the Dead Sea Scrolls tonight, Tim?
You know, I read them, Gaster's translation, a long time ago. And I was really fascinated with them. And that was before my mission. And then after my mission, I studied it more. And then while I was at BYU, I read the Temple Scroll and found that quite fascinating.
Did you see Salt Lake City in it?
No. No.
You didn't read it close enough then.
Not at all. I know. Well, it's just the same thing that's in Leviticus, where they talk about building the temple. It's just a little different, with the inner and the outer courts.
Right. And like Revelation and the New Jerusalem in heaven.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But tell us, did you ever see? Tell me that you know who Einar Erickson is.
I know who Einar Erickson is.
Yes. What do you know about him?
He owns a bunch of property, apartments and stuff. Or he did.
Well, good for him. Do you know anything about him with his ancient documents and all the talks that he used to give about them?
All his lies that he said he met Moshe Dayan. Did you know that? Have you heard that?
No.
He claims it. Yeah, he claims to have met all these Israeli diplomats, important people in Israel.
Oh no. Really?
Never did. Yes.
I didn't know he made the claims.
Oh, yeah, there's some tapes out there where he claims he met with Moshe Dayan and Miguel Gadin and all these other people.
Did they deny it?
Well, I've never been able to verify it, but
Oh, so he could be telling the truth.
he could, yeah, I highly doubt it, though. I mean, when I used to listen to his lectures, I went, oh my God, I can't believe what this guy's saying half the time.
Oh, well.
I mean, I was more educated
Yes.
After my mission than before. You know, I mean, when you listen to the tapes on my mission, my God, when I says, I can't, no, he was making some outlandish claims that just, to me, were unbelievable.
Do you remember one of them?
Well, the one about meeting Moshe and Yagel and all these other important Israeli people.
I thought you meant claims about parallels between Mormonism and ancient texts.
Well, parallels are meaningless. I learned that a long time ago that, you know, I mean, there was an article, I can't remember which journal it was, called Parallelomania that Richard Anderson pointed me to. And when I read it, I said, wait a minute. So why are we always comparing parallels when they're meaningless? They don't mean anything.
But Tim, maybe you tuned in late. What do you make of the fact, though, that the Book of Mormon does not have the S at the end of seraphim like the King James Version does, but the great Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls does not have the S?
Yes, right.
What do you make of that?
I heard that.
How do you like them apples?
Well, also, the Isaiah scroll they found has what? 4 different scribes or something now they've identified? It's just absurd. The more and more we look at this stuff and the more and more we try to justify it with Mormonism, the more and more it falls apart.
Well, I know that when the Isaiah scroll came out, I'm vaguely aware, having researched and read stuff, even before I was born, I've read stuff. I read stuff that was published before I was born. I'll make that clear. Okay. So I know that there was an anticipation, at least on the part of some Mormons, that the Isaiah scroll from, you know, what, 2nd century BCE, pushing it back 1,200 years, it's going to show a huge change. And the changes that's going to show are going to line up with the Book of Mormon, which is the Isaiah that was on the brass plates that Lehi and his family took with him, right? And then that was another huge disappointment. But in spite of the disappointment, there are people like Seth over at Rise Zion who still try and use these things in order to prove the Book of Mormon true, in spite of the fact that BYU professor after BYU professor in the 1990s and the 2000s have gone on record saying there's nothing there, knock it off.
Yeah, I was at BYU when FARMS and my cousin was part of the group that was doing the stuff in the Dead Sea Scrolls in an ancient studies department. When they were finding stuff, he was telling me about stuff that they found that it just didn't square with Mormonism. You know, the more and more stuff they found, and some like John Perry became more and more entrenched in Mormonism, and my cousin, you know, drifted away. I mean,
well, there's such a tendency on the part of Mormons to want to find Mormonism everywhere. I remember going with some friends of mine, this was back in the early 80s, to the movies to see Time Bandits. Do you remember that? I think it was Monty Python or Monty Python.
Oh, I love that movie.
Related.
I love that movie.
Okay. And at the end, they have God there, and he's just sort of an older guy. And he's and somebody asked him a question about, why did you do this? You know, so one of these chestnuts. And he just says, oh, I don't know. I can't remember. Something about free will, probably. And I heard that. I don't remember anything else about the movie, but I heard that and I thought, this guy, whoever wrote this, they must be a Mormon. It's like only Mormons believe in free will. That's how bad it is. No. And I think that what I did there is similar to what a lot of apologists do with the Dead Sea Scrolls. What do you think?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, we were all, when we were true believing Mormons, we were searching for anything and everything that would confirm our belief system.
Yes. Why do you think that was?
I mean,
Why do you think we were built that way, Tim? Not every
because
Mormon's
we
like
want
that,
to
but a lot of
judge-
them are. Why do you think so?
we wanted,
Why is it that we're so insecure that we're always looking for confirmation?
we want to justify our existence. We needed to find meaning outside of the normal mainstream Mormonism. And that's why I did it. I was looking for further meaning, further enlightened knowledge. I mean, I remember reading Second Peter, where he talks about, faith. GNC 4, and that's it, Second Peter, where he talks about the way to get your calling and election sure.
It's somewhere, yeah, and all those steps.
Yeah, and I was at my cousin's.
Is that the one that says add to your
yeah.
something this and add to this that?
Yes. And I opened up McConkey's commentary to try to figure out what it meant, and it was gibberish to me. I went, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Hmm. He knew, actually, he just wasn't telling.
Yeah, right.
He knows it's an ordinance. He knows it because he's received it, but he's still going to hearken back to what Joseph Smith said, and that it's sort of like, you're walking along one day, and I've been a righteous Mormon, and then there's a light and a voice, and you hear the voice saying, "You shall obtain." And he even put that in his freaking hymn, "I Believe in Christ."
Right.
And I quoted it from there, right? That the voice comes to you and it lets you know that your sacrifice has been accepted to God and your calling and election is made sure. But I think that was before they made it into a ritual. They ritualized it. So it doesn't happen spontaneously, separate and apart. It is controlled by the priesthood keys and those who have them in the Mormon church.
Yes. But this whole thing has always fascinated me. The Nag Hammadi manuscript to me is more fascinating than the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll find a professor on the Nag Hammadi who we can have come on the show and explain it to us.
Yes.
Any of you out there?
Because they're all Gnostic texts.
Yeah.
And talk about the demiurge and that kind of stuff. And, I mean, you read the Gospel of Thomas, and that's more like the Gospel than anything else to me. When I read it, I said, wow, this guy really knew what's going on.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a show about this at some point. It's all very fascinating.
Yeah.
I agree. And the Gnostic stuff is very interesting. They have the demiurge. When I was in college, I wasn't studying the demiurge. I was studying the demi-plie. Little dance humor there.
Yeah, right.
These are the jokes.
I mean, like we all looked at the pseudepigrapha and the apocrypha and all these writings, non-canonical biblical writings that I would go and read. Why did they leave out the Didache or the book of Jude, I think it is, or Job and Tobit and all these books?
Why did who leave them out? I'm sorry, Tim. Why did who leave them out?
The people who created the Bible. When the council got together, there were like 3 councils, I think, that met together, deciding what was going to go in. There were like 40 versions of the Bible, and they were trying to decide what books to include in it and what to exclude.
Yes, they finally came up with it. Was it the Council of Hippo? Or was it the Council of Trent?
Hippo, yes. Hippo. I think it was Hippo. Yes, that's right.
396? See?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
That was at the first time. No, that was Athanasius's Easter message, where he writes out the list of 27 books that we have in our modern day New Testament and no others. And that was the first time that list had ever appeared. Correct?
Yes.
But then later on, they thought, hey, Athanasius, he's on to something here. So we'll make it official.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Yes.
Anything else, Tim?
Well, just remember that everything in the Bible is a forgery because we do not have the original documents.
Well, because we don't have an original, does it make it a forgery?
Well, we don't have the first draft, right?
Right.
It's a copy.
Okay, sure. Yes, we have no originals
technically
of any of the books of the Bible.
That technically they could be considered forgeries when you look at it that way. I mean, you know, and even the names that were like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were attached to the four Gospels for many years, and even the letters of Peter and John and all those guys, we don't know if they really wrote it. Like some of the Paul letters, he didn't write, and his name gets attached to it.
No, you're right. Originally, the Gospels were attributed to John, Paul, George, and Ringo, I think.
Right, exactly.
There you go. And that's why, and the Book of Mormon, called the Fifth Gospel, was written by the fifth Beatle,
Joseph Smith.
That's the one.
The fifth.
Joseph Smith was the fifth Beatle,
right? Pete Best. No, Pete Best. Right? Pete Best. Remember?
Oh, Pete Best. Yeah,
the drummer.
I know that there are different people who have different ideas, and of course, it's Pete Best. Some people suggest others.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pete Best.
Anyway, this whole thing is fascinating. It's fascinating me my whole life. You know, stuff. I used to have a huge library. It's gone now, but talk about all this stuff and look at it.
Like Hugh Nibley said, it's all clean fun.
Pardon? It's all what?
I said, like Hugh Nibley said, it's all clean fun. It's all good, clean fun. That's what he said.
Yes, it's all good, clean fun. Don't take any of it seriously.
Right. Meanwhile, he's writing more books on it than Stephen King.
And when we check his footnotes, he always would write something like those marks that you showed Bill in his Journal of Discourses. He would put little marks like that near his stuff. You'd find a book in BYU library and open it up to check a footnote, and he puts a little notation or some kind of a sign by it. So we always knew where he had been because we could find it.
Like
he was putting it in his own books, or he's putting it in the books of others?
In the library books, the BYU library books.
But not the ones he authored. It wasn't he was doing it to his own work. That would be...
No, he was where he got this, whatever the source was, like when we were checking his sources for the Nibley volumes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was easy. I opened the book up. Okay, what page? Oh, here it is. Yeah.
You could see sign that he had been there before you. It's kind of like Journey to the Center of the Library.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. It was fun. It was fun.
Well,
good times.
Oh, you're welcome.
Have a great day, my friend.
Thank you, Tim. See you Friday.
Have a wonderful day.
Take it easy.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Sure. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Next call is a person named Chad, I believe. They want to talk about Carrie Molstein. This should be interesting.
Chad,
how are you?
Not too bad. How are you? I can't see you guys. Can you see me?
Well, we don't see you. You called in instead of coming into the studio.
Tim can see you, but he's a remote viewer.
Okay, that's different.
But we hear
I'm
you.
on my laptop here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is probably about the 5th time I've called in. But yeah, I just wanted to start. I was very excited with this episode because I was watching Ex-Mormon Informant, and he was criticizing Seth from Rise Zion for a video that he did on an Aztec codex, supposedly confirming the Book of Mormon. And I left a comment on Ex-Mormon Informant's video mentioning that I saw the exact same thing with the Dead Sea Scrolls back in 1999 when I was in Institute. And that prompted Ex-Mormon Informant to do a Dead Sea Scrolls video. And then I was excited to see that you guys were doing a Dead Sea Scrolls video, and watched it and decided to call in. But for Carrie Molstein, when you put up the the article that he did, and you circled the yellow bullet point there. I went through all the bullet points, and he's using all those arguments to verify that the Dead Sea Scrolls support our faith. And all those arguments are the exact same arguments that Ward Radio and Seth from Rise Zion are making. So I just wanted to point that out.
Well, I didn't see him make the seraphim argument.
They're taking a playbook from this guy.
Yeah, but I didn't see him make the seraphim argument, at least.
No, he didn't make that one.
No, I'm glad that he did. By the way, on Rise Zion, I did see that Aztec scroll. It's like, what are you talking about, an Aztec scroll? Wrong people, wrong writing. And I listened to it, and all he's talking about is I'll circumlocute, the Mormon scholar who's trying to find the connections between ancient Near Eastern languages and Udo-Aztecan, Brian Stubbs. He's talking about Brian Stubbs and his scholarship, and we trashed him. We thoroughly debunked Brian Stubbs, and by we I mean Colby Reddish and I, in a previous episode of Radio Free Mormon about the Light on Truth letter.
I think I saw that one.
Yeah, and I watched that and I thought, what should I do? Should I respond to this by saying, hey, this guy's talking about Brian Stubbs, we already talked about it here, and just replay it? Now, I don't know. At some point it seems kind of reductive to do all of that. People who are going to watch that and believe it are going to watch it and believe it regardless of what the truth is, and regardless of whether it's accessible over here or someplace else. I remember quoting extensively, like I did tonight, from 3 BYU professors. There's at least one BYU professor with knowledge in the relevant area who totally is dismissive of Brian Stubbs' efforts and his conclusions in this regard.
That's correct. Yeah. Ex-Mormon Informant did a hit piece on that video. So you're good. You don't have to do it.
Oh, good. Okay. Because I do have other things. So that's nice to know.
Your accent, are you from the Dakotas, or where are you from?
Calgary, actually, Alberta, Canada.
There you
go.
A
little north.
Yeah.
Oh, how did you know that, Bill?
I could tell the accent was a sort of a Fargo kind of accent, and I was trying to figure out where he was from.
Wow.
Not the first time I've heard that. Someone else that I met in England probably about 25 years ago now made that similar comment.
Wow, awesome. Was there anything else you wanted to share, Chad?
That was pretty much it.
Oh, I'm glad you watched. I'm glad this show was meaningful to you. It was especially meaningful to me. There's a lot of things that I'm doing now with Colby and on here that have to do with big parts of my experience in Mormonism, big reasons for being a Mormon, continuing to be a Mormon, as long as I did, that I'm having to reevaluate and let go of through the process of
me as well. Like, I did a lot of deep diving into air quotes Book of Mormon archaeology, and I had to deconstruct all that as well, and that's been many years on both sides of that equation.
You know something? Can I tell you a story about my dad here, Chad, for a second? Because it reminds me of this story.
Sure.
The thing is that what we do as Mormons, Chad, me, Bill, others, we learn all the wrong stuff. We learn it all backwards, right? It's like Steve Martin said that he's looking forward to having his own kid because he's going to teach him all the wrong words for everything. And then imagine his kid the first day of school when he raises his hand and the teacher says, "What is it, Billy?" And he says, "Can I move Dogface to the banana patch?" Okay, that was the joke. This is what Pastor humor back in the 1970s. But we have to learn it. We learn it wrong, and then we have to unlearn it to learn it right. Anyway, the story is about my dad, who's this is way before I was born. He's a mechanical engineer. His degree is in mechanical engineering from the University of Colorado. He's trying to get a job. It's been the 40s, maybe 30s, I don't know. But he's applying around, and there is an opening and an ad for a job for a chemical engineer. So oil and gas, right? Chemical engineer at a big gas company. So he goes ahead and applies there. He says, what the heck? I'm applying everywhere. I may as well apply here. I got no chance because I am a mechanical engineer. So he gets there, is in the lobby. The other guys are there waiting to be interviewed. He chats with all of them. There's 5 of them. All 5 of them have degrees in chemical engineering. So, of course, my dad goes, well, I got no chance. Long story short, they all interview. My dad gets the job. He's shocked. He waits for a while. And then after he's been there for a month or so, he goes to the guy who hired him. So, you know, I'm the only one who had a mechanical engineering degree. These other guys had chemical engineering. Why did you hire me? And the guy says, well, the problem with guys with chemical engineering degrees is they come out of college, they get taught all the wrong things. So what we find is that we have to unteach them all the wrong things they learned in school and then teach them the right way. Whereas it's much easier just to take a guy like you who doesn't know and teach you the right way to start with.
Right. Yeah, I know when I resigned my membership in 2017, I was still on YouTube watching Wayne May videos and defending Book of Mormon archaeology on fringe Facebook archaeology pages. That's how wild it is.
And that would be Heartland stuff, right?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, and it takes a while to deprocess and deconstruct all that, even after I resigned my membership.
Yeah, it is. It's we don't get there overnight, and we don't leave there overnight, do we?
No, we don't.
The great thing about the Mesoamericanists, Chad, the great thing about the Mesoamerican people in the Book of Mormon geography thing and the Heartland people is that they're so busy fighting with each other about where the Book of Mormon took place, then they don't have enough time to actually look at the Book of Mormon itself and realize it didn't take place anywhere.
Yeah, I'm glad I deep dived into John Lundwall's episodes with Mormonish, and he thoroughly explained a lot of that stuff, so that was pretty good.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's amazing. I think he's ghosted me, though, because I keep trying to get a hold of him to come back on the show to talk about something else. John, if you're out there watching, just hit reply.
Well, thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
It was great talking to you guys.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks for watching.
All right.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you bet.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
And then our last caller of the night, let's see. I don't have a name. Oh, that's never mind. That's
Schofield.
No. That's somebody who already called. So we're all good. So I don't have a third caller. I'm going to end the call in studio. I'll let you close out the show, RFM. And
not a moment too soon.
That was a lot of fun.
Oh man, this was great. Thank you everybody for watching. This has been a hugely important episode for me. I think that because it's raising its ugly head again, that we had to address this thing and all these connections that people are enthusiastically putting out there on various podcasts about how the Book of Mormon is true because the Dead Sea Scrolls, baloney. All of it's baloney. And we've quoted no less than 3 BYU professors who know about the Dead Sea Scrolls to prove that it's baloney. And we've shown you some examples of how incredibly funny sometimes that baloney can be. Everybody, please join us Friday at 8:00 p.m. Mountain Time for Mormonism After Dark. And we will be here next Wednesday, 6:00 p.m. Mountain Time for another episode of Mormonism Live. Good night, everybody.